Okay. Yeah, well, first of all, it's really good speaking to you guys. Sometimes you think sort of like almost like one parent with a child. You think you sort of that's the better way to parent, But I think when it comes to true crime, I think you can never have too many cooks in a way, As long as you all sort of open-minded and going for the truth,
That's right.
I think what we must all agree, even our readers and even our viewers, I think we must try and forget everything that we know just during this conversation. Even if we do that, I think we're going to carry with us some of our ideas anyway. But I think we must just hypothetically just say, well, let's pretend we're starting a brand new page and just see where that takes us, right?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
In other words, we just we want to see if we can get some new information in this discussion that we're talking about, things that we haven't thought about before, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think at this point I might just start by saying that there's still a lot of things that we wanted to look into, but Calvin has always felt that we're not in it to explain every single thing, so still a lot of open areas, so we're open to new ideas, new conversations, and all of that. So it's not like we feel like whatever we said is cast in stone and that there's no other word on it. So yeah, I think we work from that perspective.
Great, yeah.
Yeah, I think we get the same criticism in a way that you guys have had, which is sort of about credibility and whatever. And it's almost like, well, can one not ask a question and attempt to answer it? And can one not apply the same standards of common sense and intelligence to what's likely in the situation? But I just want to share with you something that's kind of funny. When you guys were in the newspaper, for getting a reaction from Arnold Pistorius, and I must congratulate you on that, because we've written quite a few books and we haven't gotten anything like that kind of reaction. So anyway, when you guys did that and you got that reaction, this was the report in the paper at the time. I don't know if you can see that.
Oh yeah.
So it's
I actually had a long interview with him. I had a long interview with them.
This bashing enraged Pistorius family, right? And so around about the time of that, I got a phone call like out the blue. My father and I don't have a hell of a lot of contact, and he phoned me out the blue and he was like, "Have you upset the Pistoriuses?" And I was like, "No, it's not me." And I think around about that time I already knew about you guys, because you emailed us the book to look at, right? And so I was sort of aware of a little bit of what you guys spoke about, and I just thought it was quite funny, that whole thing. But what I want to kind of ask you guys about is what do you think resonated the most with the Pistorius, that they responded in that way? In other words, what do you think? Because I think you touched a nerve, and so what do you think touched the most nerve with the Pistorius that they responded?
Well, I think that we touched on something which they desperately tried to hide. They did their best to obscure all of that stuff during the trial. Yeah. In the beginning, there were talk about an argument before the shooting, but the defense did a pretty good job in subduing that and pushing to the back, and so everybody kind of accepted the fact that there wasn't an argument, and we kind of rejuvenated that particular line of thought, and I think that made him very nervous. So
I think the whole idea of a physical assault or a physical fight, I think that is something very sensitive to them, and I think we really touched on that. But funnily enough, it wasn't one of our big things, I think the media slightly over-dramatized it. We'll talk about the back wound a bit later. I think we just wanted to show or explain that wound in particular. But I think in our whole narrative, we wanted to bring out the whole aspect of a physical fight. If you look at the autopsy photos, post-mortem photos, you can definitely see that. We'll speak about Simon also a bit later. And I think, as Calvin said, I think they did a good job to sort of subdue the whole the bruising issue, you know, the signs of physical fight, physical argument. And I think that issue, let's call it a bad issue, brought that out. And I think that really put them on the back foot. And I think that is really touching a nerve.
Yeah. Before we get into some of the physical...
I think...
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just think that it affected them so badly that Barry really had to start mentioning our book during the sentencing hearing.
He opened. I mean, he basically opened right away.
He really became very emotional about it, and I'm wondering, why did he do it? Was he afraid that the judge read this book and may have changed their mind? It really wasn't necessary, and in my opinion, to go to that extent to bring that up in court.
The only way
it's actually improper to bring something up that doesn't serve as evidence. It doesn't have to do. But I think Harry Nell, in a way, was clever there just to mention the book, as if to put it, you know, to the attention of the judge. But just getting back to what Calvin said, you know, it's very strange that Barry Rue actually mentioned it.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was...
Well, can I put something out there which is something that I don't know if you've gotten... You must have gotten to this, Lisa, in White Horse 2. It's a book that I've been writing now, sort of with Lisa. But it's basically, if... I'm just wondering what you guys think about this. If you look at... do you remember the reenactment video, which came out in July 6th? Or was it June 6th, in 2015, or was it 2014? Anyway, it was 2014, yeah. And you know, it was this big thing, it made sort of international headlines, and then the next day in court, that it wasn't even referred to. The judge didn't refer to it, Barry Rue didn't refer to it, and the prosecution didn't either. The media kind of went nuts, and they were like, what does this mean, and everything. But the bottom line is, if the prosecution had referred to it, you know, the defense could have said, well, you know, this was taken out of our hands. The prosecution shouldn't have been. In other words, they could have gone into that old trial by jury narrative, you know, and then the case could have gotten thrown out. But what I just want to add to the conversation here is, what if Judge Masipa had referred to the ITV interview? Couldn't the same thing have happened with the defense, saying, well, you know what, she shouldn't have seen that, and the fact that she did as corrupted, whatever her sentencing, you know, the defense would have had a defense to say, well, now her entire verdict is biased, and this has got to be thrown out. You know, what do you guys think of that?
Yeah, so you essentially saying he maybe tried to bait her to see if she actually read the book, and then said, yeah, but listen, if you read the book, you know, now it may have influenced you. So whatever you say now.
I'm just thinking more with regards to the ITV interview, that if Masipa had referred to that, the case would have...
Did she refer to the ITV interview?
No.
No, but I'm just saying, maybe with the incident that Calvin and I talked about, the book, maybe Rue just threw it in to see if Masipa actually read the book.
Well, you know, I mean, obviously, what sparked off the whole thing was Barry Steenkamp. And his testimony talking about, you know, how the family feels that their daughter was murdered, that this was no accident. And so that kind of sparked off the whole thing. But I do find it very interesting, and I do think everything that you're talking about here, that there is more to it behind the scenes, in Barry opening up his statements with that. He's not talking to a jury, he's talking to a judge. You know, it doesn't matter what's happening on the outside, it has no relevance. So, it obviously had quite a bit of impact. So kudos to you.
Well, in the States, they sequester juries. So in this particular case, the judge really had to sequester herself. Yeah. So I hope she did read the book, and I hope that she didn't see the ITV interview. Yeah. Because I don't think that would have been proper.
Yeah. So what I want to kind of dive into a couple of things that we want to talk about. Nick and I actually had quite a long conversation yesterday, and it was something that he posed to some of his Twitter followers as well. And Nick, I'm gonna let you take this in just a second. But one of the things that he and I feel very strongly about is that a couple of things that Nell should have done was have visual charts and demonstrations in the courtroom that he could have used while Oscar and maybe some of the other witnesses, but specifically Oscar, while he was on the stand, could point to, so that he could explain to the court why he did or didn't do certain things. Instead of just putting up, a picture on a monitor, actually having something in front of him that he can point to and that the court can really fully understand, like we've done, and I'm sure that you guys have done in your investigating.
I just want to jump in there quickly, Lisa. I found your book excellent with regard to your illustrations. I just thought you guys really showed it very well. I think the mistake I made when I first read your book was I started just looking at the pictures. You need to look at the pictures and the text together, but even so, for example, your graphic of the house, kind of like from above looking down. A lot of the graphics they showed in the media, that they basically would show the infrastructure of the house, so they'd show the walls and so on. They weren't necessarily showing where Reva's slippers were, or where the jeans were, where the duvet was, or where the fans were. You know what I mean? And to then take that graphic and then show like directions of movement and whatever. I just thought that that was very important to show, because you need to show in a sort of a graphic representation what Oscar's story is and where that makes sense and where it doesn't make sense, and then where what the state is saying, something else had happened. I mean, we had to have our own graphic as well when we describe our own scenario as well. So we really had to visualize it.
Yeah.
But what I want to sort of put to you guys, if you look at the, and I think Lisa, you know where I'm going with this. If you look at the bail affidavit, which came out in February 17, 18, 19 in 2013, it was his first version. He didn't even have to give a version, but he basically goes from, I get out of bed, I go to the fans, I hear a noise, and then he goes for his weapon, right? And I'm just going to put this out there quickly. I'm not trying to catch you guys out. I just want to see whether you guys follow this reasoning. So in that bail version, it goes from fans to gun, right? Now, can you guys remember what he added between, like when he subsequently came into trial? He added a little piece, like a little block between being at the fans and going to the gun. Can you remember that?
Yeah, he actually added two things. The first thing he added was a second fan, the small fan. That wasn't mentioned in the trial.
Yeah.
So
he first spoke just about he went out onto the balcony to fetch a fan, one fan.
Yeah.
Which is hugely different from the later version where there's actually two fans essentially in the room. So yeah. Well, Calvin, you can continue.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's a lot more basic than that. It's just that Oscar's trying to get in his story. Obviously, I think all four of us agree his story is not true. The whole thing going to get the fans isn't true. Yeah. What I'm trying to convey here is the psychology of the storyteller. That in other words, in the bail hearing, it's the way that he says it is he basically says when he's at the fans, he hears a sound. In other words, he says, I'm at the fans, I hear a sound, I panic, then I went to my gun, right? But when he, and there's a problem with that if you take that on its own. I just want to illustrate something with you guys. So if you take what he said subsequent to that, he said something subsequent to the bail thing, which he didn't say obviously at the bail. He added a little block and the block that he added was moving him somewhere between the gun and the fans where he was standing, and he had to move himself there, otherwise raise all sorts of questions. Do you know what I'm getting at?
Yeah. Like here, if after the bail hearing, I think Oscar did a lot of thinking about how of potential ways that the state could trip him up later. And he had no idea what the state would do and what level of investigation they would undertake. So he continually adjusted his testimony to, because from the time that he started moving the fans, that's about the time that Reva would get out of the bed, to when he heard the sound of the window, had to be the same as Reva getting off the bed and walking through the window. And him hearing the sound just after he moved the big fan didn't fit that timeline. So then he introduced the small fan. And then he introduced the third thing, which was covering up the little blue light with the jeans.
That's it. Yeah. Now, in it's you once got to go back, because this is such silly little information. You sort of easy to mix it up and think, well, what does it matter if the whole story is not true? But for Oscar, it doesn't matter. And if you actually look at that thing, it's if you look at that graphic of yours, of the Oscar's facing the fans. When Oscar's facing the fans, he's actually got his back to the bed, right?
Yes.
He's got his back to the bed, but he doesn't have his back to the way that the way to the bathroom. If he just looks like that, he can see to the bathroom, right? Yeah. When he's facing the fans. Yeah. But so Oscar's got to, in his story, he's got to move himself somewhere so that he can constantly not see Reva. Mm-hmm. If Reva's moving as well, he's got to constantly not see her. So this is the part that I just thought fascinating from that perspective of Oscar telling a story that's going to make sense under cross-examination. Yeah. And it's basically, again, in Oscar's bail, he says he hears the sound. He doesn't say it specifically like this. He basically just says, I moved the fans, I heard a sound coming from the bathroom. And from that you can infer he's saying, well, when I was moving the fans, I heard the sound and I panicked. And then I went for my gun. But when he comes back to court quite a few months later, almost 11 months later, it's basically he's saying, well, no. After I brought the fans in, then I moved to the hi-fi. Now when you move to the hi-fi, he's basically still got his back to the bed, but now he's standing somewhere else, right? And now he's really got his back to the way Reva would be going out. You get what I'm saying? And he has to do that because when he's at the hi-fi, that's actually where he specifically says, that's when I heard the sound. When he's at the hi-fi, right? Yes. Now, when that hi-fi is trying to make it, he's also trying to illustrate why it's completely dark. You can't hear anything, see anything. And in the little bit of YouTube thing Lisa and I watched recently, Clarinel says to him, well, if it was completely dark and Reva went to the toilet with her cell phone, and we know that she did because her cell phone was found there, surely you would have known that there was if someone's walking with their cell phone on in pitch dark, it's going to make like a cocoon of light, you know.
We mentioned that book as well. I've got a small Samsung Young. It's a small screen one, and if I lit the screen, it lifts the whole room. Not lit like you can see everything, but I mean all the walls, you can see all the glare there. Oscar tried to cover all his points. The very first thing that I picked up during the trial was when a lot of other things, but specifically when Clarinel asked him about the fan, and he said the fan was blowing in his face. And I just thought at that very moment that even on his stump he's still taller than the fan, much taller. So he just tried to cover it. Then it was the fan blowing in his face, and then it was the dark, and his back to the bed the whole time. And what we tried to do in the book is to cut through all of that by saying, listen, the curtains are hanging 5 centimeters from the floor. On his own version, the balcony light was on, so it could not have been pitch dark. It could be dark, but not. And on the sides as well, you're gonna get light in there. So just to say, and also then, and I think there Clarinel was, in my opinion, just poor. The whole thing about the cell phone, Oscar saying how she would have used a cell phone to go to the bathroom or whatever. So now Gerrie was trying to say, but you would have seen it. No, he was turned this way and that way. Instead of then just saying, you don't have to see the handset.
Yeah,
if you
exactly.
lift the handset, you're going to see it against the walls.
Yeah. Thomas,
I really don't think it was.
Yeah, Thomas, what I think was really missing here was first of all, Gerrie and I having a big graphic display. In the O.J. Simpson trial, they had big overhead displays, bigger than a person, like big overhead displays. Do you remember that Lisa?
Yeah, and that was 22 years ago. So yeah, they have the means to make them, So yeah.
Yeah.
And they also went to the scene.
This was 22 years ago. They even took the jury and the judge into the people's homes, right? Now, I really don't know why they couldn't have done that with this case. I mean, I don't know what your experience was, but my experience in court, even my experience writing about it, I would really get confused between, like if you're talking about things happening on this bed, when is it left side, right side? Is it always, well, I'm looking at the bed and so the left side is looking at the wall, that's the left side? Or is it, I'm lying on the bed and now that's the left, right? But even when you said, okay, now I understand, later on you'd be like, but that, because Oscar's saying that now, does that make sense? Or is he saying it because it doesn't make sense? So it's just really confusing. But the way to get around that is you simply go there and you stand there and you have Oscar say, I was on that side of the bed, which is the side where Reva's slipper's on. That's his version. And Reva was on that side, which is the side where the windows are. Yeah. And then surely you would have standing there and kind of folding your arms and saying, hold on. So you woke up because you're too warm. You're still kind of asleep. Reva's already awake, and she's like, "What's wrong, Baba?" or whatever. But you waking up and you're the one that wants the windows closed, and Reva's still awake, and you've communicated that to her, and she's right by the window. She's right there. She's on the right side of the bed by the windows, and she's like an able-bodied person. Couldn't she just sort of get up, take a step, and close? Now, like literally in his story, you're this disabled guy, you've got to get out the bed on the wrong side, struggle like he struggled across the courtroom, struggle, get to the window, close them, and then get the fans, moving the fans, all that. And then while he's got his back there, then Reva sort of goes, I'm just saying, if they could have done that in situ, like there, yeah. I think people would have realized, and the judge would have realized, wow, this doesn't really make sense.
I want to come back to a previous point that Lisa made. I wanted to reply on that because going on here as well. I think a big shortcoming in our courts is exactly that. It's not proper presentation. Yeah. It's very old school. I've spoken to some prosecutors, other prosecutors, and they agree. It's very old school, and I mentioned it partly in the book, and I mentioned it at the talks and whatever. They sat there with the little screens, pointing out the gene with the cursor or whatever, instead of having big overhead projectors and, taking people to the crime scene. I've got a big issue with Masipa not going to the scene, Then you can see how far the steps are from Oscar's house. You can get a sense of distance. You can get a sense of distance in the, in the room, how long it would have taken. Just, for example, that whole situation there at the bed. If you explain it visually to people, now you put the picture on. I like to do that when I talk. You put it on the screen, and you show them. Okay, let's assume now, as we do in the book, that the right side of the bed is the balcony side. Reva's sleeping, even on Oscar's version. Now, when he moved the fans, so between the balcony door and the sound cabinet, he's moving the fans more or less there. Now, even on Oscar's version, if for Reva to have gone to the bathroom, now she had to get off on the right-hand side and literally walk past.
Yeah. So she had to get off over the bed. She had to move.
Yeah, over the bed. But even over the bed, it's still a meter and a half.
Yeah.
No, it's crazy.
But the thing is, if you don't present this properly to people, if they can't see the room, if they can't see the distances, it's just a generic picture in the head. And I think that's a big mistake in this case with Masipa. She had no clue about the layout. They showed a few pictures of the house, whatever, but she didn't have a perception of the distances and where the bed and the, and all of that. I think that's a huge shortcoming.
I want to ask a question, so along those lines, and then there's something else that I want to move on to. But just real quickly, I want to ask you guys, what do you think was the initial thought process behind Oscar placing himself on the left-hand side, which we know was not his typical sleeping spot? Why did he initially do that?
Maybe Calvin can give a better answer. I actually quite incidentally thought about that a couple of days ago, and I'm not sure I've got a good answer. But I think it's he needed time. He needed time to get up and walk around the bed.
Yeah.
And I think it's to do with the gun, position of the gun.
That's what I think. Yeah.
Personally, I don't care which side of the bed he slept. It could be that on this particular instance he told the truth. There's certainly nothing that indicates to me that he slept on the right-hand side and not on the left. He said he had an injury to his shoulder, and that's why. That was true. I don't know.
Well, there is evidence to show that he slept on the right, closest to the balcony, because his gray T-shirt was on the floor next to the bed there. So most people, if you're just going to throw your shirt off, you're going to throw it where you get in.
Maybe you've got a lot of things there. You've got
his shaver.
A lot of.
Can I give my?
We made some issue with the TV remote and all of that, but it's possible that when they decide, and I need version. Yeah. When they decided to sleep, to just switch. You can't say it's impossible. But to me, it's not, as Calvin said, it's not for me the biggest point.
Nick, did you want to?
Okay, I just want to share two quick thoughts on that. Why I think he had to be on the other side, and also why he changed his narrative from, not changed it, but just added that piece. This is the part that I wanted to mention earlier, is the reason Oscar has to move himself from the fans to further along the room is if Oscar hears the sound, the sound of the window opening, the sound that makes him panic, and he's standing by the fans. Now, this is where I really want to encourage our listeners and readers to while we're talking, we'll put the picture on the blog, but have a look at that blog, have a look at that picture while we're going through this. Basically, if you have a look at Oscar standing where the fans are, and that's where he hears the sound, you have a problem, not in anything else but psychology. And the psychology is this: if Oscar is by the fans or at the doors that is just closed, and he hears the sound there are quite a few huge problems that he's going to have to answer, and here are a couple of them. The first one is, if it was you, if it was anyone, and you hear the sort of sound that's going to make you go for your weapon immediately, it's a sort of sound that's going to wake you up and scare you, what are you going to do? You're going to, in that position that you're in, you're going to turn around. You're going to be like, well, I heard something, and you're going to turn to basically the sound. And here's the problem. If Oscar turns around at that point by the fans, right, he's now looking over the bed towards the bathroom window that sort of go slightly over each other, right? I'm talking about just in terms of trajectory. And now from that position, the shortest route to his gun is actually over Reaver to where he's saying it is on that side of the bed, right? And so in other words, just in terms of the psychology here, Reaver is between Oscar and his gun. Literally, that is between them, right? So that's the first thing. And so in Oscar's own story, he's got to move himself slightly round so that even though this doesn't completely line up, it's not as though when he's at the hi-fi, Reaver's not there. It's just that she's not directly in the way. You can kind of argue that he's sort of looking at the entrance to the passage while he's backing out. And in other words, he's sort of, Reaver's, I can't see her, and my attention's that way, and that's the bullshit story he told, which Masipa evidently believed. All I'm saying is the difference is if you're at the fans when you hear the sound, there's so many things you could argue. You could say, hold on, Oscar, you've just closed the curtains, you've just made it dark, and now you hear a sound. Couldn't you just make it light right where you are? Just open the curtain again. Also, you at the balcony, couldn't you just have walked straight to the balcony? Say to Reva, come with me. Let's just go straight out here where we are, right? In other words, just where he's been standing, he's made it dark. He could theoretically make it light again. Also, this is the major reason why I think Oscar said he didn't sleep on the right-hand side, and also why he said his gun wasn't on the right-hand side. Now, Samantha Taylor says Oscar always kept his gun on the right. He never kept it under the bed, and he certainly never kept it on the left, right? So why would he say that? I think the reason is, think of it like this. Oscar's standing on the right. Now remember, Reva's also supposed to be sleeping there, right? Reva's supposed to be sleeping right there on the right-hand side. Oscar's closing the blinds. Now, if the gun's there, he's getting the gun right when Reva is just about to leave. Do you know what I mean? In his own version. At the time that Reva would have left, if the gun was on that side, he would have been reaching for the gun by the bedside table, and Reva would have been like, what are you doing? You know? Do you follow that reasoning? In other words, he's making himself too close to Reva. He's got to be moving away from Reva while she's moving as well. You know. Yeah,
like it makes sense that he would want to put his gun under the bed under the left hand side. It's just it was easy for him to reach. He didn't have to cross paths over the bed to the other side, and then he would have noticed that Reva wasn't there. So it suits his version to say that the gun was on the left hand side. Whether it was there or not, we're not 100% sure. We know that the holster was found on the left hand side. So
you know, we talk a lot about like patterns and you know, with certain things, and for me, it's always very troubling when you look at like something that's happened and everything about that person's story that's typically normal has changed for that day. You know, I think that's just a real red flag.
There's too many coincidences, things that happened that day that didn't happen on any other day.
But to the depths that he had to think that out, it's actually pretty disturbing how somebody would have to go through that thought process. But obviously he had a team.
Yeah, but I think the assistance he had assistance later on. I think, for example, the holster being on the left-hand side, I think however it came there, may have led him, you know, to eventually put it on the gun under the left-hand side, whatever. You know, I think he had time. Oh, I don't think you need a lot of time necessarily. Yeah. You know, to.
Well, in a sense, he did, because you know, in terms of certainly in terms of Van der Merwe, didn't she say she heard the argument since 36 minutes past 1? Didn't she say that?
No, it was about.
She started hearing voices
just before 2.
Yeah, it was about 1:56.
Yeah.
So the argument was between 2 and 3 o'clock. Just at 2 o'clock.
But I mean, the point being, if it was an hour compared to 17 minutes, actually less than 17 minutes, about 14 minutes. That's quite a big difference. It's not like half an hour, 40 minutes. This is 15 minutes to an hour. That's a big difference. Yeah. Also, an argument lasting an hour, you're likely to have lights on, you know, compared to you have a bit of a disagreement for 15 minutes, you know. Yeah. But I mean, you know, if you take all those things together, that plate that was banged in, the door that was bashed in, which Lisa and I also want to talk to you about, the air gun bullet into the door, the second pair of jeans lying on the outside of the house, also that incredibly acoustic stuff you guys did, which showed that Van der Merwe couldn't have heard Oscar from the bathroom, and that's also something that I thought was fantastic about your book, is suddenly you're getting like a 3, one could even say 4-dimensional view of things, because you even show the acoustic waves and all that kind of thing. But you know, like what you don't appreciate necessarily, a lot of the stuff we do is we line up the narratives, and we look at the things that have been said. We line that up. And what you guys have done that's fantastic is you take measurements and you check the science of it, which is great. But what I thought is so, you know, something that I didn't really realize is when you walk into Oscar's front door, the bathroom is the furthest end of that house. You've not only got to go upstairs, but it's the furthest end upstairs of that house. And when you realize that, suddenly another thought jumped into your mind, and you're like, hold on. In the middle of him saving Reva, remember he ran downstairs to open the front door. That wasn't like he just, where I'm living right now, downstairs is sort of just out the door, and then it's down and the front door is there. It's not like a long way down and another long way. This is for like a disabled guy, and it's literally like, if you add it all up, I'm not sure, you'd have a better idea than me, but maybe, say, 10, 20, maybe 30 odd meters here to cover, and then come back as well. 60 meters.
Yeah, I've got about 30 meters. 30.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I want to do?
Yeah, coming back to that point, again, it was important for us to give, to show the house, whether some people might know the layout and all of that. It's very important to understand the layout of the house, and then also the position of the neighbors and all of that. Then you get perspective, and then you can understand the issues. And I think that was sorely missed during the trial, because if you talk about neighbors, who are they? You don't understand how to travel. It's I really think I want the world class work there with the sound issues. It's just to show that we're dealing with scientific, laws of nature issues here. Sound travel in a certain direction, in a certain way, for example, low frequency versus high frequency, all that. So that wasn't taken into account. Again, now in the ITV interview, Oscar talked about the next door neighbors being in a better position. But if you take into account the science of sound,
Look, another thing is, if Judge Masipa was taken to that residence of Oscar's, and she could basically be told, through this window from the bathroom, there you can see the steps. And as you guys said so well in your book, I think on the very last page, you were just saying the steps were perfectly situated to hear and to see everything. You couldn't actually have designed the houses better for that.
We say eerily, it's absolutely 100% perpendicular. And I think I sort of end off with it. If you look at the rugby field, the 22 meters, the other line is 70 meters, just to put it in perspective. So it was so perfect. But again, the court, you sit in court, even if we sit here and you think about 70 meters, you can't really, it's neither here nor there. But if you see
the house. Yeah, I think you said that the distance between Oscar's bathroom window and the steps balcony was the width of a rugby field.
Yeah, shorter. The quad plane, the 22 meters line. When you're under the poles this side, not even the poles on the other side. It's just the other side of the quad line. It's so close. But I think even if they could have gone to the house, the judge and the assessors and all of that, they could actually stand in the bathroom and they look out and they would have seen how close it actually is. I mean, working on stuff like this, I always, you start living in another sort of world. So I'm more attentive to 70 meters than I would have been 5 years ago. I would look 70 meters. You're so close. You can throw a stone to 70 meters.
But I think what really upset us, and I think all of us in this discussion, obviously a lot of trial watchers as well, what really upset us was that Masipa kind of said, you know what, these eyewitnesses and ear witnesses, they're not quite agreeing with each other, so let's just throw it all out. That'll make it a lot easier, and we'll just take Oscar's version. And what I really appreciated with your book was you guys, without getting into the science of it, I mean, you don't have to be any kind of expert. You can look at those sound cone illustrations that were showing where the sound's the strongest for various incidents. And you can say, well, this neighbor was in a good position to hear those particular sounds at that time because that's where they were made or whatever. You've got to remember it's a house with holes in it. It's a house with windows, and certain things like the bedroom door and the metal plate and all sorts of things are at different places in the house, and so sounds are going to go in different directions from that particular sound. And so I thought that was really useful. But the thing that the thing that I think you've got to sort of like appreciate with the various witnesses is, you know, there was a cacophony of noise. You know, I think the way that the whole case is being described is there were bangs and shots, and they were confused. And so there's one set of bangs, one set of shots, and now which one was which. And what I tried to convey in our writing of it was, you need to try and, whoever's trying to imagine this, you need to try and imagine the chaos of an argument. No one argues in a clean way where you know you bang a door and then you wait a while. No, there were bangs and there were loud noises coming throughout the night, different kinds of loud noises. One thing we don't know, I don't think any of us know for sure, when was that metal plate banged in? Because that would have made a very loud noise, I think, as well. You know, the metal plate. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm just saying that's another noise. Yeah.
Yeah, I suspect that the plate was banged as part of the first sounds.
The first set of bangs.
Oscar hit the door twice. He hit
before the shot. Before the shot.
Yeah. And I think just
I suspect that
I don't think you're gonna recognize or distinguish necessarily between you know, on the plate or on the door that time of the night. You know, you're not gonna be that particular in your perception. But yeah, just Calvin can continue now. But yeah, we believe first sounds. We also call the first sounds with the back blows. Might have been a mix between on the door, on the tiles, and on the steel plate. We don't make a lot about the tiles.
Do you think Oscar banged those tiles that the tiles fell down? The tiles behind the door. Do you think that was? We actually had a page or two in about that, but I took it out because one of those instances we can't really say. What is interesting is you get wood splinters under the tile. Mm-hmm. So we tried to figure out the difference there. You know, why was the wood splinters under the tiles? You would think if you bash it, first tiles, then the wood splinters. But again, you couldn't really say what that could have happened afterwards. You know, he may be going back and doing a few things there. It could be that the tiles fell down because of vibrations of the frame. I doubt that. The tiles is one of those things that I always thought I would like to get back to. I can't really.
Okay, so
I can't really say why you would have hit. Okay, you know, he's ballistic crazy, he's mad, and he's eating all sort of things. But I'm not so sure about how.
Okay, so let's move the conversation from we've kind of already moved it from the bedroom to the bathroom. Before we do that, I just want to say really quickly something I've said to Nick a long time ago. I apologize, we've got a little bit of feedback on the sound here, but my theory is that the argument was happening in multiple places in the house, and I actually think it's possible at some point they were outside. Because I don't think that Oscar ever ran downstairs to open the front door. There's no bloody handprints or anything on the door, which he should have had blood on his hands at that time that he went to go do that. There's we have Mrs. Van der Merwe hearing the fight an hour before the shots, and she hears it from the front of the house. We have Jeans that are outside on the lawn. We have Mrs. Stipp, who said she felt like she heard noise, like screaming coming down the road. All of that suggests there's a mobile argument going on. And I think it's a possibility, we don't know for sure, but it's a possibility somebody may have ran outside during that time. But certainly I think that they were running around very
Wasn't our reconstruction, that our sort of reimagining of it, that Reva first actually escaped from Oscar. She got out, and then she actually came back because she didn't have her car keys and she didn't have her bag, And by this time they'd already had a physical encounter. She'd pushed him off his stumps. Maybe she'd even thrown his stumps away, or I don't know, just put them aside. And so now she's kind of gotten the better of Oscar. She's able to outrun him, but she doesn't figure on him getting hold of his gun. But the point being, she's got to come back into the bedroom to get her car keys and get her stuff, whatever. And that's when Oscar approaches her while she's in the bedroom. And this is the point we want to ask you guys is, what do you think of this idea? I think in your examination of the cricket bat, you found a little hole, a small little mark that was the same kind of
a pellet
indentation as from the air gun. Is that right? In the cricket bat?
Yeah. It looks like it. It's got the same diameter. We're cautious to say it is. Like, in instances, we're cautious to say it is. Based on fact, you can't say it is. But it certainly, we try to show the consistency with the hole in the door, and then also the little hole in, I think it was the shorts. But just coming back to that point, it's also something we didn't really go into, but it seems that there may have been sort of indent.
Sorry, are you saying the hole in the shorts could also be the air gun?
Yeah. No, not the big one, not the one in to the top, right? Where the hip wound is. On the left, I think it was on the left-hand side. Yeah, again, it's the same diameter. What is interesting, Simon said he found in the autopsy report, he found misshapen projectile. But again, like Simon, there it stops in the clothing. He found misshapen. Now it's difficult to think how he would have.
Of a black talon bullet through a shorts. I know there's like a tiny little slit, They
were talking about the possible the pellet.
Yeah. He's not talking about the main hip thing. He's talking about another fragment that was.
There was a little hole on the left more or less in the midline of the left leg of the shorts. Also about 5 millimeters in diameter, which Simon actually noted. And when I read the autopsy report, I actually went back to the photos and I could see the little hole there. Again, we're not saying it is a pellet, like we're not saying the hole in the bat is from the pellet, but it's consistent, with other holes. Like in the door, which we know is 4.55. But just coming back to possibly running out earlier, that's something we didn't actually really even talk about, but I think it was at the back of our minds. There may have been two, let's call it, incidences where there was sort of close together, but a previous fight, maybe that's when the shooting through the door happened, the bedroom door with a pellet, because we have to use cautious wording and whatever in the book. So we didn't say did shoot through the door, did shoot and all of that, but the hole is there and something must have happened. So she might have gone out then, and then decided, listen, this is, if I leave now, it's going to be a big problem because maybe the media and all of that. So maybe she went back, try and calm him down and whatever, maybe getting keys and whatever, and then it escalated again. So there may have been two events, because I thought about it actually today again, if we, for the sake of the argument, accept the shooting through the bedroom door. Difficult to place that in the timeline. And that may have been a bit of maybe an earlier event. When I say earlier, it's still close together, minutes.
Yeah.
But like 3 o'clock.
There was an argument, and then she came back, and then the main incident.
Right in the beginning, when the media were suspecting that steroids were being used, all these silly questions that Mark Williams Thomas asked Oscar, but when the media still suspected that Oscar was using steroids, when there was also the first suspicion of the cricket bat being used, I remember there was a graphic showing that the suspected Reba was already shot running down the hall. Do you remember that? That the suspected Reba sustained her first.
That was pretty early on, yeah.
shot, and obviously they thought with the parabellum, but I still think it's possible that she did get shot with an air gun in the bedroom area. I don't think it's absolutely the same as a cricket bat. I don't sort of feel like it's absolutely essential to the narrative either way. There was still an argument, but what is interesting is in the bedroom, for example, they found blood on the headboard of the bedroom. Now, how is that possible? You know what I mean? Yeah. You know, how did the duvet get down to where it did if they didn't have a tussle in the bedroom? But the thing I really want to ask you guys is, what I'm trying to get at with a bat is that bat's actually an ornamental bat. It's not the kind of bat, I think both you guys can agree with me. If ordinary South Africans got a bat like that at home, without signatures on it, you might play around with it. You might sort of take it out every now and then and sort of play with it. But a bat that's been signed by like a team is like an ornamental thing, which you're not really going to use for hitting anything. So I think
he wasn't a cricket player. Yeah.
You know, and Oscar did say that he used the bat to sort of
close the door,
reinforce the door, help hold it closed, which I think Lisa and I agree doesn't sound very likely. In fact, it would be good to get Samantha Taylor's take on that. But what I want to postulate to you guys now is this idea of Reeves now fleeing from Oscar, but she's fleeing into the bedroom from the outside of the house. Oscar's pursuing her, and we know that, or we suspect that the bedroom door doesn't lock properly. It's got some kind of security issue, and so now you have a situation where Reeves on the inside, and she can actually arm herself. She can actually defend herself. And so what does she do? She takes Oscar's bat, which maybe is a prized possession even, you know, he likes that bat, but she's using that to defend herself. And Oscar's on the other side. Somehow he's gotten hold of the air gun, which who knows if it usually was in some other part of the house, but you know, he's on the other side with the air gun, and now he's starting to hit on that door. This is the bedroom door now. So literally there were two door shots incidents, the bedroom door and the bathroom door. And maybe that's why she ended up dying, because if he'd pulled a gun on her, maybe he would have thought, what am I doing? But the fact that there was a precursor. Anyway, the point being, what do you guys think of this? Reeves on the other side, she's got the cricket bat, which she's kind of using defensively in two ways. The one is, if Oscar's going to shoot her with an air gun, she's sort of using it almost as a shield, and that's how it got the first impression in it. But the other one is, and then he shot her again, and then she actually got hit. But those marks on the side of the bedroom door, don't you think those marks could have been caused by Reaver hitting with the bat? You know, like Oscar's pushing, you know, and maybe he was on his stumps at this point. Maybe the stumps were with Reaver and that side of the room. I don't know. Maybe Reaver even threw the stumps out the window, but not the stumps, the prosthetic legs. But the point being, Oscar's on his stumps. He's not as strong as he could be or should be. Reaver's trying to get out of there, whatever, but she's now trapped in the bedroom. He's trying to get in, and she's kind of hitting the door where his hands would be. You know what I mean? He's trying to get himself into the bedroom, and she's hitting the door with a cricket bat where his hand or his head might be, because he is armed with this air gun, and she's got to make sure he doesn't get in. What do you think of her hitting with a cricket bat, making those marks on the edge of the door?
I have a theory. And this is just a theory. This is very difficult to substantiate. And so, at some point down in the kitchen area, they start fighting. At that point in time, Oscar already had the cricket bat with him. During the fight, he ripped off the vest. That's why we get the holes in the vest and then her abraded nipple. She ran upstairs, he followed. She got into the bedroom, tried to close the door, lock the door. Oscar managed to get his cricket bat in there to prevent the door from closing and shouldering the door to try and get in. Maria gave up on that, and she ran. Maybe she couldn't get away in time, and they had a bit of a tussle inside the bedroom. That's why the duvet was on the floor. She managed to get away, ran to the toilet, and locked herself in a toilet. Now, when the pellet gun was shot, I'm not sure. It could have been at the earlier altercation when they were still in the bedroom, and he was chasing Reva, and maybe during that altercation, the way he ended up on the floor, she ran out. He grabbed the gun, he shot through the door. Maybe not with intent to kill her or to injure her, but just to frighten her. I followed her downstairs, and they went back upstairs again. So it's difficult to place when the pellet gun was shot, but I do believe that the door was injured, was damaged when Reva tried to close it.
But
isn't it odd that Harry and Nell didn't like? The only explanation, isn't this our explanation, Lisa, why this wasn't brought up in court, was that we feel that the defense and the state kind of agreed not to talk about certain things. For example, the defense didn't want Carl Pistorius, titanium Hulk, and the whole story about the phone being wiped. They didn't want that in court, and the state didn't want Hilton Buerta in court, and then the defense didn't want to talk about the bedroom door and the second pair of jeans, and then the state didn't want to admit whatever things that they may have bungled or whatever. They needed Mollett to introduce the cell phone testimony, which is quite important, so there's a bit of a quid pro quo, and to me that's the only way that it makes sense that Harry Nell would just not bring up, for example, the second pair of jeans. I mean, how the hell do you explain what's a pair of women's jeans doing outside the house below the room where Reva died? I mean, how did that get there?
Well, it seems like Harry Nell only wanted to ask questions for which he knew the answer. For example, the classical example is the metal plate. So the metal plate was investigated by Vermeer. He looked at it. He even looked at it under a microscope. He saw minor scratches on it, but he could not say what made the damage. He could not say it was a cricket bat, and for that reason,
and I think there might be chain of custody issues. There might have been the way the police handled the evidence and provenance and all of that. Lisa, I think you want to say something. I just want to quickly come back to the point Nick made, and I quite like the idea of the cricket bat behind the bedroom door, taking this the pellet as a second hole, But I must also say, I'm making no claims here, but the fragment wound on Reva's chest is so bothering me.
I just don't, knowing the kind of guy Oscar is, I think he would have been quite heilig about his cricket bat with Brian Abana's signature on. I don't see Oscar initially going after Reva with a bat in the beginning, because he's quite heilig about his bat. But once the bat's been hit around a bit, then he's the Murin, and then he might have used it. But I honestly think Reva took it first.
I'm absolutely sure she had that bat at some stage in her possession, and we made quite a lot about the ripped rubber of the handle. There was a twisting and turning. Now, who was on what side? I can't necessarily say, but there was a tug of war on that bat. That I'm sure, and I've thought about it in the past that Reva had the bat at some stage, and he wanted to take it from her, vice versa. But I think it's quite possible that she may have had the bat and sort of with her, and the shot, the pellet shot came through the door. That would explain two holes in one shot.
I've got a feeling that hitting the panel was at the end of. You must remember, like Oscar's this proud Olympian sort of guy, and now he's literally having a physical contest with this model where she's pushing him over, and they literally it's like hand-to-hand combat, and in a way Reva's winning, but she's not cheating, like she's not using a gun or anything like that, and then ultimately Reva in a way gets the better of him. Reva gets into a toilet, locks it, and she's got her phone with her, and so in a way she's got the upper hand, within that status quo. And I wouldn't be surprised if Reva basically laid down the law to him. You let me go now, or whatever. Or I'm going to call someone. Or, what's interesting is June Steenkamp and Mark Batchelor. I don't know who's spoken to them, but both of them seem to believe Reva had Oscar's phone with her in the toilet. So that's another possibility, is that at that GPS connection at 0148, which lasted 5 minutes, that could have been a WhatsApp, say, from Jen Atkins, which all Reva had to do was hear it. She didn't need to identify who it was. But Lisa, you can jump in here. What woman hearing a guy on a phone, just a message coming through at just before 2 in the morning on Valentine's Day, and you in the same house as your boyfriend, and you hear this message coming in on WhatsApp, whatever, is going to not go, what the hell was that? Who are you talking to? What's going on?
Absolutely.
They're going to want to verify that. And Oscar may have said, well, whatever, and then Reva may have taken his phone to check it herself. But the bottom line being, Reva's now in the toilet, and Oscar's reached that point which Samantha Taylor actually talks about, where she says, Oscar's like got a button, and once you push it, there's like no turning back. You mustn't react to Oscar, you must just sort of be calm. Because anyway, and then at that point, Oscar is in this temper tantrum mode, but he's also panicking. And he hits the metal plate with a bat to intimidate her, to basically say, I'm angry. Do you hear my anger? Come out right now. This is it. I'm at my wit's end. And Reva would have basically said no. You go outside or whatever it is. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I certainly think that was in a fit of rage, and it was sort of throwing down something on a track, on a athletic field, whatever, lost, and he throw something down or kick something.
Yeah. So
I think it was very much in that sort of mindset where it was just absolute desperate anger, that situation.
That's an interesting conversation on its own. Was the actual operative emotion here fear, like fear of a phone call being made, fear of him losing his endorsements, fear, or was it anger? Was it anger that led to fear? I just think that's an interesting debate as well. So I want to touch on something else, which is more what you guys spoke about. Can you correct me if I'm wrong? The distance from the muzzle, from the exit point of Oscar's weapon to the door, wasn't it 220 centimeters, or was that 2.2 meters? Was that the distance?
Yeah, Calvin, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the shoulder would have been about 2 meters, and I think the gun 1.6.
1.6 meters. Yeah. Because yeah. I don't know why, but in my mind, somewhere I saw 220. But you could also say, well, what is that to bullet D or is it to bullet A? And I think there would be a difference. But the point I want to make, which you guys also really clarified in a really good way. What I like about some of your graphics is you show little blobs where you show that's where Oscar's standing, that's where Reva's standing. Now, something that I think you guys have also highlighted, which totally contradicts Oscar's version, is Oscar's story, both in the reenactment video and in court, is that he was sort of carefully coming around the corner and he was holding himself up with his left arm, right? And there's something I sort of try to measure looking at the dimensions of the room, but I also looked at your graphic, and from some of it's intuition, some of it's calculation, some of it's gut feel, but based on all that, it looks like Oscar's actually in the room when he fires I'm talking about this in the bathroom, when he fires at the door. What I'm trying to get at is not anywhere near to being behind any kind of wall. In other words, his whole narrative about, well, he's scared that someone's going to come out the door and attack him, and that's why he's sort of like, he has the door, he has the wall, and he's sort of looking around the wall like that. We can actually put pictures up of the reenactment where he's sort of showing that sort of thing of he's got his one hand up and he's doing that. That wasn't the case at all. If you take your measurement that you guys made, that actually puts Oscar, and the angles of the bullets as well, the angle of the trajectory, that actually puts Oscar clearly in the bathroom, and not only in the bathroom, he's slightly in front of the basin. In other words, he's in that square of the room, and here's the other part that's a problem. He's got nowhere to put his hand to the right. Lisa and I were talking about it yesterday, and Lisa was saying, well, no, that's not a problem. He could have just sort of gone like this.
Yeah.
And sort of stabilize himself like that and shot like that. But
can I jump in?
And then I said, actually, if you look at the angle, he would have actually had to put his arm behind his back like that to stabilize himself. But my point is just this. Without going into those merits too far, you can simply say he couldn't have done this. He couldn't have stabilized himself by putting his hand to the right. He wasn't anywhere near. There was no wall to his left.
Well, let's assume that he had to stabilize himself.
He was saying in the court version and in the reenactment video, he was saying he needed to hold himself up.
Yeah. Look, based on the position that we determined, I think it's not really out of sync in terms of position where Mangena and I think other people that looked into this issue as well. He was in the bathroom. He shot with his right hand, so he could not lean to the right side. He was shooting.
Yeah.
So how could you? Is that possible? In his left, there wasn't anything to hold onto either.
I think Lisa's point, correct me if I'm wrong, Lisa, I think your point was that he may have had his back slightly leaning against the base. Couldn't he have, because I do think we've seen him on his stumps. Either he was a really good shot that he could fire four shots with a weapon like that without having feet, or he did stabilize himself in some way.
Well, I think
it's not really that important, but the thing is, the basins are too far to the right. It was inwards from the basins. That is where the trajectories would converge, and he was not leaning. But even if it did, it's not really that.
All right. So what I want you guys to do is I want you to go from. I want you to.
I'm just saying it's important in terms of the intruder narrative, because the intruder narrative is basically saying he was hiding behind a wall and he was afraid that someone was going to come out the door. And again, this is why the judge should have been there, and why you needed a proper graphic representation, is to say, where exactly was Oscar standing? And then you say he's standing right there, the wall's behind him. And there's nothing between him and the door. So if you're so afraid of intruder coming out, why were you standing right there? I think the counter narrative to that, and this is where Nell needs to come in and not just say why that's not true. You need to say why this is true. And our version of why Oscar was at that angle was he battered that door so much. In other words, it wasn't bang shots or shots bangs. It was bang shot. Okay, the bullets were all in one go, but the bangs were all over the place. There were lots of bangs going on the whole night. But what I'm trying to get at is, I think Oscar tried to break down that door before he fired at it, and he may have dislodged some wood, next to the door handle, and so he was able to actually see into the toilet, and that's why Oscar was standing at that angle, because he was seeing into the toilet and he could see where Reva was standing, and that's why he was able to fire at her on target, because he did actually have sight into the toilet through the first little crack.
You know what I think would be helpful to do? So just like Calvin had done earlier, what I wanted you guys to do was we've talked about them fighting downstairs, coming upstairs, and then what's happening in the bedroom. So tell me, maybe Calvin, you can do this part of it too, is give me your theory, and we understand this is just a theory and you're speculating, of how they then get from the bedroom to the bathroom, and what Reva does and what Oscar does, and if you can explain the positions when he gets his gun, how all of that plays out. I'd like to hear your theory on that, and then I think that can address the position, the angle,
Yes, so my theory is, okay, Oscar had the cricket bat in his hands. He was chasing whoever went into the toilet locker cell. I think that really infuriated Oscar, that she kind of took advantage of his disability by being faster than him and by using her normalness to get ahead of him. And I think that made him very angry. Mm-hmm. And he wanted to intimidate her, to scare her, so he knocked the plate in, and I think he knocked the door a few times. So there are all kinds of marks on the door. But those weren't really attempts to break the door open. It was just to intimidate. Mm-hmm. So, and I think more he just lost it. He went back. He went to fetch his gun. He came back, and then when he fired 4 shots. Now I don't think he even knew what he did until the last shot.
So what about the pause that the neighbors heard? I mean, do you believe Michelle Johnson said that she heard, is it Michelle? Yeah. I know Michelle Berger, but then who was the Johnson lady?
Charles Johnson.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry, Charles. Okay, got it. So yeah, Michelle Berger. So she said that she was very clear that she heard a pause in between the first shot and the last 3 shots. So, I thought she was very convincing when it came to that. And then, so that kind of gives you a sense that he shot 1 shot, thought for a second, and then continued to shoot. And then, of course, everybody that heard those bangs and thought they were gunshots describes how the sound of the screaming woman trails off at the end with the last shot. So essentially, he consciously stops at shot 4 because he knows he's killed her, right? Which implies he knows what he's doing or he can see her through cracks in the door, right? So
I think the pause after the first shot, I don't think it was a long pause. It was just maybe
I agree. Yeah, I think it was brief.
A fraction longer than the other.
Look, it's a relative. The concept of a pause is relative. It could, in some instances, a pause could mean 5 seconds. In some instances, half a second you can consider this a pause. So I think
it's my opinion that he really lost it. I don't think it was. I want to say premeditated. More of a crime of passion, where you kind of in the heat of the moment do something that's stupid and that you will regret and for the rest of your life. And I think that's what happened. I think after those 4 shots, the reality hit him, and he really became remorseful, regretful, panicky. I think he was in shock. So I think a lot of the emotions that people saw afterwards downstairs, I think those were authentic.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that he wasn't working on some excuse and a version in his head, because he had to save himself. He knew he was in trouble.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of his emotions after the shots and his actions were pretty authentic. I don't think.
I always say, when the shots, the sound of the shots died out and the screaming and it became quiet. I think in reality hit him. What exactly happened after that? We never tried to explain every single second. But
do we all agree that? I mean, this is Oscar's version. I'm just saying, do we all agree that I've listened to Oscar's testimony now a few minutes ago, and he talks about shooting through the door, so he's fired. Then he backs up into the bedroom, and then he goes onto the balcony because he can't find Rita now. He goes onto the balcony. I'm not actually sure whether he runs back to the toilet at this point. I think he does. He goes back to the toilet. Then in his own words, he says he rushes back. The part I'm not 100% sure is if when he first goes back to the bedroom and doesn't find Reva there, if that's when he goes onto the balcony. But What I'm not in any doubt about is Oscar goes onto the balcony in his own words. First of all, after he fires the shots that kills Reaver, and second of all, is on his stumps. Now, what I think's important about that is if you know, one's going to say, well, no, I think he was really remorseful, and I think all this is the fact that Oscar knew what he did, and then he screamed for help 3 times. I don't know. I don't know whether that's true remorse, because I think what you would do if it was me, if I shot someone by mistake, I think the first thing I would try and do is help them. I don't think I would be running out onto a balcony. Think about it like this: in Oscar's own version, he said to them he said to Reaver all along. This is Oscar's own version. He said, "Reaver, call the police. Reaver, call the police. Reaver, call the police." But what's the first thing Oscar himself does? The first thing Oscar does is he doesn't call the police. The first thing Oscar does is he doesn't call the ambulance. The first thing Oscar does is he shouts for help, which is a great way of not getting help for quite a while. I mean, who would shout for help when you can make a phone call? And then this, but who does he phone? He phones Johan Stander. Now, how's Johan Stander going to render the sort of aid that a doctor needs to? Because what happens when the Standers do come is he says, well, help me take Reaver to the hospital. So isn't the way to save someone's life, well, get either the person to hospital as soon as possible, or get a doctor to you as soon as possible? But how's phoning the estate manager, the person who knows all the people who live there and who can kind of, if you've got a good relationship with all the witnesses, how's that going to help save someone's life other than save your bacon? I'm just saying, I think
it's a lot of weird things there. I mean, the correct thing would have been to leave Reaver there. I mean, what does he think? Where's he going to take her by carrying her? You don't carry an injured person around. But I think, in a way, we were always very careful to try and explain mindset. You didn't just put yourself into that situation. I think a lot of stories were made up afterwards about why and how and all of that. I think in that specific case, you would have been.
I think that's a major difference of focus between your narratives and ours. Is I think we go into that area where angels fear to tread, and we say, for example, we think a big thing missing from the state's case was a motive. We believe it was premeditated murder, not just murder. For example, Oscar going to fetch the gun and coming back with the gun and eventually shooting 4 shots through the door. We believe that's premeditated murder. Yeah. I've also said this before, that if there's any pause between shooting those 4 shots and the fact that Reaver had time enough to go into a defensive posture, isn't there enough time for a wounded person who's being shot by, like, they didn't expect to get shot, to have a shock response and then even go into a defensive posture? Surely if there's time to reflect for a wounded person, surely there's time to reflect for the person who's attacking them, to say, I know what I'm doing. You could argue, well, no, it's not enough time. 1 second or 2 seconds or 3 seconds isn't premeditated murder. But what is fetching the gun from the bedroom and walking all the way there and then shooting when your life is not under attack? But just to come back to it, what I think is a bit of a misconception, like you can say, well, nobody knows what's going on in someone else's mind, and also, how can you know? I was in a discussion the other day, and I was saying, these people sitting right next to me at the table here. If I had to ask you, what do you think they're going to do tonight? We're not in their home. What on earth are they going to be talking about? And you're saying, there's just no way we can know. And I said, I disagree. I said, if those people are writing messages on Facebook, if those people are tweeting or putting up Instagram messages, those people have said things in the media again and again and again. If those people, all their conversations are recorded, and you can start putting together not just a psychology profile, but a behavioral profile that reinforces itself again and again and again and again, and you can tell. what we see in the behavior of criminals, like we've written about Jodi Arias, O.J. Simpson, Oscar Pistorius, Amanda Knox, what you start noticing is you start going, well, that criminal is quite a lot like that one, but not like that one. That criminal also has a similar thing to that one. Now, I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. If you look at a guy like Don Steenkamp, I don't know if did you guys follow the Quick murders?
Yeah, I've read the books. I didn't follow it every word of it, but I know the case. They killed his father and mother,
and sister,
and raped the sister.
Yeah,
killed the sister.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want to go into too much detail, but I think it's very important, even if you don't know the answer, just to ask the question and then to say, well, maybe the answer is this, maybe it's not, maybe it's that. So in the case of Don Steenkamp, did he kill his family and did he kill his sister because he was angry, or did he kill them because he was afraid? And it's very important to draw the distinction between a fear-based killing and an anger-based killing. You know, like over and over again in the media, we hear this was a crime of passion, and we hear that it was what jealousy-filled rage or something like that. But I don't believe that. I believe Oscar killed Reva out of fear of losing his endorsement. So now, if you go to the Don Steenkamp thing, I believe it's the same thing. It's Don Steenkamp being afraid that his sister, and this is where I think that judge did something Masipa didn't. In every court case, there's a missing little piece of data where nobody actually knows the answer there, but you have a lot of lines that form like a dot, and you've got to make a little bit of a leap over a missing piece of information. You have to make that leap. But you can make that leap with some confidence when you've got long lines of information that are lining up. And in the Don Steenkamp thing, they couldn't say for a fact that he'd raped his own sister, but they could say for a fact that there was a period where only the two of them were together. There were certain things going on in his life and her life where she was having boyfriends and he wasn't having girlfriends. And then they found these contusions in her genital areas, and those contusions didn't mean definitely that she was raped, but you've also got to ask yourself, the fact that she was killed, it almost is like a reverse engineering thing as well. You could say, yeah, but that doesn't prove it. But then the other side of the story is you see that his sister got the brunt of that killing. She was not only shot, she was shot with two different weapons, and she was bludgeoned. Her whole head was absolutely beaten with the part of the back part of the gun. So she got the absolute brunt of this attack, and you've got to say, well, what did he have against her that he didn't have against his parents? Right, and I think the reason that he killed all three of them was, first of all, he can't deal with the scandal of incest with his sister, and then losing the inheritance from his parents, so millions that he stood to inherit. So in other words, there the operative emotion is fear, not anger. Obviously, he's angry about that he could lose something, but he's trying to protect his interests, and that's based on fear, not on anger. But what I want to highlight here is the difference in psychology between Don Steenkamp and Oscar. Is Don Steenkamp is to me more of a psychopathic kind of person. He shows very little emotion. When you see him, when you follow the narrative, you get a guy who's very calm, who doesn't seem to show much emotion. And at the time that he committed these crimes, he was 16, 17 years old. He testified in court, and the judge said, "Wow, you were really convincing." He was a much better witness. This is a 17-year-old on the stand than Oscar was. Now, this is a guy who's killed 3 of his own family members, and he doesn't shed a tear in court. Then you have Oscar, who's completely different. He's retching in court, he's howling, he's sobbing all the time. All I'm trying to say is these are two totally different personalities. And when you start seeing that those personalities inform the entire person in all these different situations, and this personality informs that one in all these different situations, it starts lining up, and you see that reinforced in the social media, you see that reinforced in the media, and you see that reinforced again and again in their performances, especially in Oscar's performances. Do you get where I'm coming from? I'm just saying that the social media provides a lot of insight into people's lifestyles, their thoughts, all that.
I think if I can just answer that short, or not really answer, but just a few thoughts. Everything I've said now is, yes, we try to look at just the evidence, more or less what we can measure. I always say we like to look at sort of what we can measure and see and explain, and not trying to get too much into trying to explain everything, especially thought processes and all of that. But if I can just shortly come back to that particular point, I think there's a mixture of anger and fear. Initially, it was anger. It was extremely angry. Riva, in all senses, all areas, basically outran him. You know, she was faster than him. It was an argument. He was angry, and when he realized she can call or she can get help or whatever, then it turned into fear. And I think that was, and in a legal sense, that is premeditated murder. If you've got 1 second to think about something, you know, that's meditation. I always explain to people, even those believing Oscar's version, even on his version, he heard the sound, went to fetch the gun, you know, a minute and a half went past, you know, he had time to think, and had time for warning shots and all of that. So I don't really want to consider his version. I'm just saying that on all versions, he had time. He had time to think about his actions, and but in short, I think it's a picture of anger, extreme anger, and then it turns into fear.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things that we want to talk about too. I think that are really important. I want to make sure we get to them. There was 2 things that I was really surprised my opinion started to change about after I read your book, because they were things that, you know, I just forever had kind of believed, and so just started thinking differently about them. One is the you guys refer to it as a vest. I'll call it a tank top. I always thought that she had that shirt on when she was shot, and I believed the evidence that the when Mangana, you know, kind of walked through and he like showed her position, like holding her arms up, that the holes in the shirt were from the debris coming out of the back of her arm, which we know was a very significant exit wound. So that's the first thing. I want to talk a little bit about that tank top. For me, after I read your book, I think you really illustrated well how she more than likely was not wearing it, and that those holes could have been caused from him grabbing the shirt in the midst of a fight. I'm curious to know why you guys think he put the shirt back on her. You know, kind of like what happened there with that shirt, how it came off, why he put it back on. So that's number one, if you guys want to make a note that we want to talk about that. The other thing that's really huge, too, is the order of the shots. Now, in the door, you know, we see shots A through D, and we know that the evidence that was given by the state was that that's the order that he shot. So from left to right, A to D, A being the hip shot, B missing, and then C and D, Mangana couldn't completely say which one was the head and the arm. On your your version, I hate to call it that, but on your theory in your book, you say that it was the opposite way around, that Riva was leaning up against the wall that is the opposite side from the toilet. So she's leaning up against that wall, and the first shot was actually D, and that was the hip shot. C then hits her arm. B misses her because the B is definitely the highest of all 4. And then A hits her head. At the time that it hits her head, she has fallen to the ground. The big thing that's different about what you guys say is that she did not hit the magazine rack against the wall. I believed for quite a long time that she did. I never thought that the magazine rack caused the bruising on her back. I just simply thought she fell onto the rack, and that seemed like a convincing angle from which that shot hit her head. But I really started rethinking it when I was looking at like the heights of the bullets and what was possible, and the heights for bullets A and D are very close to each other. So there's not one that's like greatly off that would say, no, there's no way that was the hip. But also, what I thought was really good about what you guys had illustrated was the blood spatter and the brain spatter that's on the back of the toilet lid, as well as the wall, like off to the corner. Like if you're looking at the toilet, to the right corner of the wall there, you can actually see, and you show that, how that spatter went out if Reva was sitting on the ground facing the door with the toilet like behind her head, how that angle would have sprayed it out that way. I thought that was very well done. So the first question that I want to pose to you is, what was it that made you think that Mangena was possibly wrong? Because he was a good witness. I mean, he seems like a very credible guy, and I think he said a lot of things that were pretty on target. But what initially prompted you to say, that doesn't seem right to me? And the same goes for the shirt. How did that all come about?
Calvin, I don't know if you can maybe add on a bit later. I must be very honest, when I worked on that, going through all the photos, I knew very little about what Mangena said, and I think it was a good thing. So I didn't go out trying to be different or prove him wrong or whatever. I really worked from a clean slate, and then normally Calvin would jump in and we would do it together. But I think I spent a lot of time initially looking at the photos, looking at the spatter, and for me it was from the start. It was just the sequence of this. I'm going to get back to the vest, the tank, whatever you call it, a bit later. But I think just let's deal with the sequence of the shot. It was just okay, I think the spatter, no spatter against the back wall was very significant. Dealing with the whole sitting on the magazine rack, I always had some issue with that because I couldn't understand it. I mean, I knew the basics of what Mangena said, but I just couldn't understand the heights of the bullet lines and all of that, how it could have hit the head and all of that. So I knew Mangena's basic version, but it never really made sense to me. So then I looked at the lack of spatter of the back wall, the spatter in the toilet bowl, the back of the toilet sort of in the corner and all of that. Then you start thinking about, I built a cubicle here in the house, exact sort of a similar replica. I did the lines, I replicated the lines and all of that. I stood inside the cubicle myself so I could sort of see what was possible.
I saw that contraption, that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I had a toilet in there, I had a magazine rack and all of that. And then you start thinking about, you know what, I was actually extremely surprised when I read quite later on that they said it was from A to D. It just completely doesn't make sense to me. Of course, if you think about it, the first shot could never have been the headshot. Well, then she would have fallen down and all the other shots would have missed. So I'm not saying that's the bulk of the argument. I'm just saying that's the kind of thing to start contemplating. If this happens first, what happens second? You know, you're trying to establish a sequence. So I just couldn't see how.
Sorry, wasn't it the defense's case that A was the headshot?
No.
No. Even Mangena said A was the hip shot.
Yeah.
He said later D could also be the hip shot, but it's too far to the right, and she would have too close to the wall, which we disagree with. It's actually a very good position in front of the door. It makes. Did
Barry Rue not say that the first shot? What I'm trying to get at is Barry Rue's arguing that the first shot incapacitated, killed Reva, so she couldn't have screamed after that, and hence Michelle Berger's wrong. Wasn't that his case?
No, I mean,
I think that was partly brought on by Gert Simon's very vague sort of thing.
Yeah.
Not really helpful. About she couldn't have screamed. Now, I can't understand how she could not have screamed. At least on our version, first deep shot, she would have had time to scream, even if it was 2 or 3 seconds. But just coming back to that, so.
Can I just interrupt you quickly? I just want to say we really want to talk about Simon after this, because I think that's going to be really interesting. But also just want to say that I just want to ask you: did you kind of sit at any point like in the toilet and like pretend you were Reva and just sort of, you know, like position yourself? Did you do that?
Yeah, no, for sure. One thing that I found, and again, that is the value of practical examination, is to, it's one thing to see a graphical illustration in a newspaper. She's sitting there in a magazine rack and falling onto, it's if you do that cubicle, the first thing you notice that cubicle is very, very small. If you put in a magazine rack there and all that, sitting on a rack leaning to the right, it's not really space. It's a lot of that argument just didn't make sense to me while I was doing it. And I was trying to look if what is possible and what not, and especially sitting on a rack would put your head quite high up. It's about 40, it would put your head about 1.3, 1.4 meters from the floor, and there's just no way. That's higher than any of the bullets.
She wasn't sitting straight up, like she was kind of like leaning over, and that's the only way he could make it work is by having her lean over while on that rack. So
yeah, but even leaning forward, whatever, doesn't really make a huge difference. But you're gonna have spatter, to the back. But there are some other issues as well. You've got the splinters in the arm wound.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Around the arm wound. So at least for the second shot, I think there's general consensus about the first shot being or the hip shot. Whether we can debate about A or D or whatever, but we say D. But at least the arm shot was not the first shot. At least at the time of the arm shot, she was still close to the door. She had.
What I thought was very compelling.
You're not going to have that while sitting at the back. You're not going to get that concentrated.
It comes down to.
Yeah, what I thought was very compelling about your position was the bullet hole A being the last shot and the head shot, and also that's directly in line with the toilet, which is where the brain matter was found. And I thought that was very compelling. The other thing that I liked about what you were talking about was asked Lisa, because Lisa and I argued about this a lot. I said I just think it's impossible is maybe too strong a word, but just extremely, extremely unlikely that if someone is shot, that they're going to end up lying kind of like on the magazine rack with their head on the toilet like it's a bed, like just lying there. I basically said, just intuitively, I can't imagine them lying anywhere except basically with their bum on the ground, with their bum on the toilet, on the floor next to the toilet, and
that magazine rack is a thin thing, it's uncomfortable, you don't have a lot of space there, you're gonna, she was only 60, 65 kilograms, you're gonna, gravity and all of that, falling again, you're not gonna sit there and
she didn't sit down gradually, she actually fell, and when she was shot in her head, she just lost complete motor control.
Yeah, I think when she was shot in the head, she would just go to the right. That's automatic, she's not gonna go to the back.
I found your analysis so it really helped me to re-envision the whole thing. I mean, something else that really gave me a visceral sense of the whole thing was when you guys described how Oscar was especially the blood spatter, when you described how Oscar was carrying Reeve, and every incident where her hair's filled with red blood, her hair's dripping with blood, and every time she moves slightly, the hair flicks, and a little bit of blood lands on the wall or whatever. And I could imagine in this incredible detail, Oscar walking down the stairs with Reva, and again, exactly where you guys were explaining, her hair flicking against the wall there, going against that silver section, and also what I thought is, I don't think we've seen it anywhere else. It was like, how on earth did Reva's blood land on the furniture downstairs unless Oscar sort of walked there at some point? And it made complete sense what you guys said, where he was carrying her, and then he may have slipped or adjusted his position on that platform on the stairs, and at that point her hair swung out and it landed on the lower level. I mean, you can see it clearly in your the photos that you've got there. But
I think it was important
anyway,
for
they
to debunk the whole thing about
it was such a strong case. I ended up just going to my toilet, and I went and I sat by the toilet, and I was just trying to feel like if I had no motor control, would I be able to sort of be propped up against the toilet? It's not very easy, but in a small space. Reba was in a small space, and her legs were kind of jammed against the wall. I can imagine her head hanging over the back of the toilet. I don't think she would have been, in Oscar's version, I don't think that's true. I don't think Reba was slumped over the toilet. But I do think she was sitting next to the toilet on the floor, and in my imagination, her head's to the back, and that's how the blood's draining directly into the toilet.
Yeah. I think his position is actually a bit closer than Mangena's position, with all respect to him. I think they assumed a lot of things, as we explained in the book. I think they worked backwards from seeing blood on the seat, and assuming the head was there, and sort of trying to reconstruct things from there, instead of just taking it from a blank page, looking at the bullet lines and the spatter and all of that. But just coming back to the point about the hair flicking, it was incredible. I did that experiment as well with a wig and sheep's blood. It's incredible how far and wide that blood can actually flick. Yeah. Because there's a whiplash on the hair. It's incredible.
When I read that section, I suddenly had this sort of technicolor thing. It was ghastly. It was like this being in a nightmare, where you're seeing Oscar carrying this beautiful woman, her hair's just covered in blood, and her blood's just flicking everywhere, and he's sort of slipping, and this whole chaotic, terrible scene. And to me, what makes it so horrible is that to me, the fact that he's pretending that she's still alive at this point, when she couldn't have been alive even when he opened the door, you know what I mean, based on no blood in her airways, based on that shot through her head. You must find any doctor or any person with common sense is going to tell you a black talon round going through the brain that exits the other side. How can any animal or person survive that kind of? Because the bullet doesn't just go straight through; it goes in and it starts doing that. It starts literally. Like the shattered hip that she suffered. She had that kind of shattering, but going on the inside of her head, and we know how devastating that was, how severe that was, because of the bruising behind her eyelid. We know she had absolute a hemorrhage in her brain, and you just cannot survive that. You're not going to survive that for probably not even a second. You're going to instantly. That's it.
I saw it as
and then to say now trying to resuscitate her and she was breathing, is just it's not even far-fetched. It's impossible.
I think it's just looking onto that, because I saw it's one of the questions on what is sent is about the blood loss. I just want to clarify that we use that as a sort of a hypothetical, rhetorical sort of to say if we only look at the bleeding, forget about the brain damage and all of that. If only assume that she bled, bled to death in I can't remember the seconds. Minute, half, whatever. But if you take the bleeding, what we actually wanted to say there is that she would not have lived till downstairs like he said she would have bled to death before then. And then also there would have been probably more blood. I know you want to talk about the amount of blood in the machine as well. But just coming back to that point, you've got the bleeding, which would have been excessive and quick. It's been a sudden loss of blood. And then you've got the damage, the brain damage, and you've got 3 or 4 wounds, bleeding wounds, entrance and exit wounds. In my opinion, she died, if not in the toilet, just we need to get out. I don't know if you want to add something.
Oh, I think she died on the bathroom floor.
You do? Why do you think that?
In the toilet.
Thomas's point that assuming we're only talking about the bleeding, then she would have died on the bathroom floor. Because if you work out the time, how long it would have taken Oscar to open a door to pull her out, that would have been by the time that she would have reached a critical blood loss. But Yes, she died in the toilet from the brain wound. And I think Oscar, in one of his many versions, said that when he got in there, she wasn't breathing. Although some other versions, he tried to resuscitate her.
Samuel, I just want you guys to highlight that in your book, which I thought was really great research. I think you said Reba's weight was 66 kilograms, and I think you said that is that's equivalent of 5 liters of blood. I think that's what you said. And then I think you said the amount of blood found in the crime scene was the equivalent of 3 sodas, 350 milliliter. Like in other words, at the bottom of the stairs, in the toilet, and in the. Is that right?
Yeah, it was very difficult. I tried various methods to try and establish the sort of in liters the volume of blood on the floor, but you're never going to know the volume going down the toilet, for example. But yeah, I guessed around about a liter, if I remember correctly. But again, the calculation there was a bit theoretical. Was just to say, if we only look at bleeding, at a very conservative blood loss of only 10 milliliters per heartbeat, she would have bled to death, within a minute and a half. And I think which we sort of see there, critical blood loss would have been 1.3, 1.4 liters, which I think is within region. If we forget about anything else, if we look at the scene there, the toilet and the bathroom, you more or less liter, maybe 1.3. So she would not have lived any longer than.
I just want to make this clear to our listeners that to say that there was, say, three cans of, the equivalent of a can of Coke, that there were basically 3 of those distributed throughout the crime scene. Because 3 cans of Coke adds up to a little bit more than a liter of blood, right? And if you look at the amount of blood below the toilet, it's minimal. It really looks like it could be less than even a can of Coke thrown out there. Look at the amount of blood at below the stairs. Again, if you took a can of Coca-Cola and you poured it out there, you probably have more Coca-Cola lying there. Obviously, there was a certain amount absorbed in towels and so on, and also a certain amount in the toilet. But the thing that I also said to Lisa from the beginning, both of us basically just said, something's wrong, there's just not enough blood. And the thing that we both loved about your book, which we didn't expect, and I think we read your book at the right time, because at the first time that we got your book, we sort of looked at a few things quickly. Some of it didn't seem to make sense to us, and then we sort of went on. We've sort of gone further in our research or whatever, and I certainly have pendulum between, was it from A to D, D to A or whatever, and I'm not going to say now what I think, but what I thought was great about your book is you guys show in clear detail that something big is missing from this whole story. There's no bloody footprints. It's a big mystery in this thing, is that there's blood everywhere, not enough blood, but there's blood everywhere, and yet how come there's no, as Lisa said, there's no bloody handprint on the front door? Reba's face doesn't even have any blood in it. Reba's lips don't have any blood in it. And Oscar talking on ITV, he has a breakdown saying how much blood there was, and actually there wasn't. And what's missing is why they're not. Oscar, if you just imagine it like this, someone is lying in a bathroom covered in blood. You pick them up and you walk with that person upstairs and downstairs a few times. Why are there no footprints anywhere? And I thought you guys showed with your photos from the crime scene that there's just literally no, they're not even marks. I think you've got one instance where you are showing 3 small little marks that could be him walking on stumps. But other than that, there's literally no bloody footprints anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is one of the first things that struck me was the lack of footprints. I just couldn't, when I looked at and I thought at that particular stage, I thought this is something the police surely must have thought about, on a crime scene like that. A bloody crime scene would normally yield a lot of fingerprints or palm prints or footprints or whatever the case might be. And that was something that immediately struck me. Yeah, and we see a lot of drag and swipe marks. So can we take a stump mark? Probably not. But I've always said, bring off the stumps. Maybe you can see what type of mark it leaves in blood if you drag it through, whatever. I don't think that's necessarily our biggest point there. The point is, again, no footprints, and that's it. I think it's, it does make you wonder about what exactly happened there, and the whole thing about bashing on the door, either being on stumps on his legs and all of that, which at this stage lead us to believe that he was actually on his stumps and not on his legs when he had to broke himself down. But yeah, that for us, it's a typical example of not for us necessarily making huge claims, but rather to say, surely the police must have. Even if not in the earlier stages, maybe they thought, they had to shoot, so they thought, we're not going to bother with the intense forensic investigation. But I think when it came to the trial and issues like this came up, surely they could have gone back to the photos and looked, when the whole stump leg issue came up, to say, let's look, because remember, if he bashed on the door now, then he took her out and she was bleeding and all of that. So now you've got a difference of a few minutes. So bashing on the door or breaking the door, taking it out, now you've got blood there. Now whether it was then on his prosthetic legs or stumps must have shown in the blood. So that
not just
been one method of looking at that issue, instead of putting people there arguing about the height and the angle you would have hit and all of that, because you must, at that crime scene, you must leave something behind, in the book.
Well, I look at it.
Lisa, do you want to talk about the prosthetic legs and the socks?
Yeah, no, I do. I mean, I think certainly there's a bunch of different things that we can speculate, but I kind of look at it similar to the argument about the bangs and the fact that we believe very strongly that Oscar and Reaver were arguing that night, even though you can't nail down exactly what it was that happened at a certain time. The story that it tells is that there was something covered up, something else happened that's out of the norm. It's absolutely not normal for there to be no prints whatsoever. So that means that they were covered up. You know what I mean? So I think that's actually the biggest part of the story. But so one of the things that that we were thinking about is if he was on his prosthetics, which I believe, and I think Nick believes too, that he had his prosthetics on when he broke the door down, is how did he not get blood on the bottom of his feet? Now, if he had, we've seen those pictures of his, in the garage when they did the crime scene photos, he has the socks on, and you can clearly see there's only blood really on the top. There's no blood that's soaked along the bottom. So I started thinking about, well, is it possible he was on his prosthetics without socks on? If he was, I think there would have been blood stained on the bottom of those prosthetics. So, so we started talking about this yesterday, and there's a bunch of towels that are in the bathroom, right? You see these towels that are all bloody that he used at various stages. When he first shot her, I think in that moment, there was a multitude of options that were going through his head. I think one of those options was to completely remove himself from being the shooter. And so at that point, you're starting to think, what can I possibly do to get rid of me from this scene completely? So those towels, we thought maybe he put a bunch of towels down on the ground so that he could walk on them and not get blood on his feet and then transfer blood to other places. And then later put the socks on. I mean, it's one theory. What do you guys think about that?
Because it is a mystery. The mystery is how because we believe there were bloody footprints, but they were then cleaned up. And so the mystery is how do you clean up bloody footprints? Number one, and number and you're in a bathroom. And number two, how do you get through the house without leaving blood behind? Well, theoretically, you don't have bloody feet anymore. You know, I mean,
can't easily
just a
clean
question.
blood off a carpet. You can't clean blood off of a carpet in like a minute or two and have it be gone. You know.
Yeah. Look, I think my first answer would be, after working with blood quite a lot, it's a difficult thing to clean. Whether on tiles, whatever, it's a messy and sticky business. So I'm not so sure about necessarily massive cleaning. I'm not saying nothing took place there, but I personally believe, from what I see, you know, it's debatable, but what I see is that he was moving around there on his stump. When exactly put on his prosthetic legs, I don't know, but I think there's enough evidence for me than what I see. Now, I would be glad to discuss it with somebody sitting next to me. We do some of it in a book. We can go through some of the marks, and I would have loved to have Oscar's known stump impressions. Then one can clarify, maybe, you know, sort of see how that match and all of that, or if there's the similarity. But what I actually just wanted to say is, I don't think it's difficult for me to articulate myself with this, but I don't think we must give him too much credit in terms of what he would have done afterwards. You know, I think he would have been an extreme shock, you know, to think about putting things down to treat and all of that. I'm not so sure about that. That's my personal opinion.
His default response to everything he's ever done is, how can I get out of it? That's kind of like ingrained in him. So even though this was this was obviously by far the worst thing he had ever done, and it was shocking, I think he's kind of wired that way, like instantly, like, oh shit, I did this, how do I get out of it? You know, so like the wheel starts churning. So I get what you're saying, but I think Oscar's not the norm in that scenario.
Yeah, I don't know, Calvin, if you want to say something there, but I just want to say that, yeah, I think as he went on and had more time, he will think about, how can I get out of this, and can make up stories and tell his version. But I think,
I think
we may think about Oscar, I think in that specific sense, I think he thought, big shit.
Yeah.
But I don't think that he would have had very clear thought processes about things. Really, that's why we actually stay away from that.
You must remember, we're dealing here with a Olympic athlete. This is a guy he's been in many high-profile interviews, like with Letterman and who's that other guy? Who's that other guy?
King.
Yeah, but he's been in many high-profile interviews, and in every case, he's honest. He says he's prepared for those interviews for hours, so that he's not caught out. And so he is a guy. Also, Oscar's a guy who's pretended his whole life to be able-bodied, and I think that's something that a lot of us don't really think about. You know, you don't really think that he's constantly pretending and constantly putting things in a situation where he seems a certain way that he's not, and that creates a certain kind of personality that's just premeditated as it is. Everything isn't really genuine. It's a bit artificial. Something that sort of occurred to me now while we've been talking. I don't know what the implications of this are, but it's certainly a thought, and it's basically, you know, we have all these strange parallels in this case. We have a woman screaming, a man screaming. We have the bedroom door, the toilet door. We have sounds of bats, sounds of gunshots. And what about this for a imperfect parallel? What if Reba's genes are thrown out a window, and at the same time Oscar's legs are also thrown out a window? And what I'm trying to get at is, I had a big problem when I was trying to figure this case out, was I was trying to figure out why the hell was Oscar not on his prosthetic legs to begin with if they'd been arguing for an hour? If they hadn't gone to sleep, why the hell would he not be on his prosthetic legs? And so that's why initially I actually believed his version where he said he woke up. I thought, yeah, he must have been sleeping if he wasn't on his prosthetic legs. But there is another counter argument to that is he's not on his prosthetic legs because they've had such a physical argument that he's been pushed off them or whatever. But if you think about it in an even more extreme situation, like an even more, Reva's she wasn't born yesterday. She's trying to get away from this guy. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. They've already had like a physical encounter, and she knows how to get the better of him, get rid of his legs. So what could she do? She throws his legs out the window. He's going to have to go out and fetch them. He's going to have to leave the house and go and get them if he wants to come after her anyway. And she doesn't expect that he's going to have the mobility and the ability even to pursue her when he's not wearing those legs. So while he's away, she packs up whatever the case is. What I'm trying to get at is, isn't this a possible explanation for why so much happened, first of all, on his stumps, but also why his stumps don't really have that much blood on them? It's because, isn't this a possibility, Lisa? When you know, in Oscar's own version, is in the middle of saving Reva, and then his phone's stunned, and then he leaves Reva, who's basically bleeding to death in his own version. He leaves and he runs downstairs to open the front door so that Stander can come in. Now you might say, but even in your version, why even say that? Why even say you went downstairs to open the front door? Couldn't you just, you could say, well, when they got there, the door was open. You are going to have to explain it. But there's another possibility, and the possibility is, what if Oscar had to go outside and downstairs to go and fetch his prosthetic legs, and all of this happened after the crime? So in other words, by the time he got his prosthetic legs, he kind of he moved Reva and everything, or he moved her certainly to the bathroom, and so he hadn't gotten them full of blood because they had actually been outside. I'm just saying, maybe.
I just don't. That's a theory. I haven't seen anything that would point towards that.
I'm like, I don't know about that. It's interesting.
Well, we need to keep it. We need to keep it simple, and basically, Oscar stays next to his bed. He's very comfortable moving around on his stumps.
Yeah, I agree. I think most of the time he would walk around on his stumps.
Yeah, so he's very comfortable, very able on his stumps. He managed to run backwards and forwards, up and down. He managed to break a door down on his stumps. He may have had some difficulty carrying Reva down on his stumps. That's why at the last moment, that's when he went to put on his prosthesis in order to carry her down. That's how they found it. That's why it's so clean. It only came in at the last moment.
So you do think he physically has a capability to swing that bat and rip that door down? I mean, I know it was already damaged, you know, which helps, you know what I mean? But if he was, I mean, I don't know. It's just, I know what you're saying, Nick. I mean, it's always bothered me that they had this long, prolonged argument that was a physical argument, and he's running around for an hour on his stumps. Like, it just, you know what I mean? It just doesn't really make sense.
In his own version, that YouTube video that I showed you.
Wait, hang on one second.
In his own version, I just want to say this quickly. In his own version, actually, Oscar says that after this is before he hits the door down with the bat. He said he actually was on his stumps, and he said he shouldered the door. No, he didn't shoulder the door. He tried to force the door open while he was on his stumps. So in his own version, there was a moment or a period where he was trying to open the door on his stumps in his own version.
Yeah, I think he's quite capable in his stumps to do all of these things, and all of this vulnerability and the performance we saw in court is just always an attempt.
Just add there that it's not official, and it's also not quite yet. But I've spoken to people that know people that went to school with him, and he's very able on his stump. He can run up and down stairs, then you know, all of that. So I don't want to put that officially on the table, but I think you can ask anybody that went to school with him or that knows him from athletic years, whether he's very able on his stump. And I think most of the time in the house he would have walked around on his stump. Just getting back to the door, you only see photos in the book. But I bought a similar door, and I can tell you that it's not difficult to break that.
Really?
That door.
Okay.
I think the first blows were just anger blows. I think the door would have been damaged to some extent, not quite, because all that needs to happen at the back of the panels, you get a sort of a strip. If that is gone, it's, you know, the panels just go out.
Yeah.
So 4 or 5 blows, fire, a shoot. That also somewhat a stabilizes door. 1 or 2 blows after that to break it down. You can do that. My 9-year-old daughter would be able to do it. So I think for him,
the whole thing where Oscar removes all 4 of those panels to get into the door and to get to the key that's supposedly on the floor. Couldn't he have just gotten through 1 panel? You didn't need to break down all 4.
Well, it's only 1 panel. Though.
Yeah. I think the whole strip. I mean, when I did it with my door, only part of the strip broke loose, so I could only push about half of the panels out. But I think in his case, it's clear from the photos that the whole strip at the top on the inside broke. So it would have been very easy. So for him to push half everything out would have been the same. So it's what happened there is really just one hard blow. Essentially make the panel loose, and then you can push it out with your hands. I'll send you the link to the video where I actually do it.
I want to see that.
Can I ask you a question? Thomas, can I just ask you a question? Just purely based on, I wanna get into a door, and isn't the best way to get into a door to actually hit the handle, to hit the locking mechanism? Isn't that a better way of breaking down a door than to break the wood down?
I think in that particular
a couple of strange things that happened here. He said he ran into the door trying to break it. He tried to push the door. He tried to kick the door, but the door opened towards him. So why did he do those silly things? You would not be able to open the door that way. And I think in this particular case, the best way was probably to break the panel. It was not a strong door. There were certain weak points, and you could see that some of the blows he did actually aim at that weak point where the panel joins the frame. The first blow he missed by a little bit and hit the frame, and then another blow he got it right there in that weak spot. He penetrated.
And it's not difficult. I tell you, if you hit a fairly clean shot there, I was completely surprised. I mean, I bought a similar door. It's a similar door. All of this. And I was on my knees. I know somewhere out there it's still stable and all of that, but I sat on a permanent platform and all of that, and it was just a fairly reasonable shot, and it just went through, and it not only went through the panel, it loosened the whole panel, so I could just push it out. So I think I really think, with all the greatest respect to disabled people and all of, even to Oscar, you know, I think a lot of people got this idea of Oscar being completely useless with his stumps. It is not the case. He's been living on those stumps for, at that stage, 28, 30 years, whatever. He's got coming back to the previous point that Nick mentioned, he's a Olympic athlete. He's probably got an overdeveloped sense of balance. Like deaf people can see better or whatever, you know, he had to develop a good balance. I think his balance on his stump, I think is very good. I mean, what we see now, sport is not nearly, and even in you know, in the evidence room video, whatever, I think if you see him, especially in a situation, he's angry and whatever, he's gonna run around on his stump. Why not? He's gonna break the horse. He's gonna shoot. Even in his own version, he shot a 9mm. Now, anybody that has shot a 9mm gun before, you need some balance. You know, it needs to stabilize. You need to have anything to. And I Dick, I've been in the army there in Tempe, 1990. Now, I'm not saying it's making me a ballistic expert, but I've shot with from a 9mm to a 90. So
yeah, we the same age. I was in the Air Force 1990.
Oh, okay. And I tell you now, the shots going horizontal is telling to me. And they're not running upwards. You know, it's okay, it's D and then slightly up and then they go slightly down again. Now, I tell you, if you shoot goof, 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 you just shoot, it's going to run up. The fact that it's sprayed.
Yeah, it's tracking. It's tracking and aiming and correcting your shot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, you know when I think Sky showed a little clip of Oscar shooting with a shotgun. Obviously, at that point, Oscar's on his prosthetic limbs, but he was really good. I mean, you could see this is with a shotgun shooting, and then quickly adjusting his aim, shooting again. You know, multiple shots with a shotgun. That takes some doing as an able-bodied person. Never mind someone with
But remember, shotgun, you've got a stabilizing hand in front, so you can sort of navigate that to some degree. But I tell you now, with the 9mm, you shoot like second. It's going to run up. I don't want to argue about the whole tracking and all of that. All I'm saying is this shows to me some level of intention of covering the toilet, because it's concerted effort to readjust, you know, to keep it more or less in line. Otherwise, it's just gonna run up. But just while we're on the door, it's quite interesting to me. One of the things, you know, we talked about other things where we sort of wonder why Oscar was lied about this or that. For me, one of the most enjoyable, interesting experiments was actually the retrieval of the key on the floor. Where you said you retrieved the toilet key on the floor, hanging over the rim or whatever. And yes, sir, after I bashed the door open, I used that same door, I put it in a frame in my house, and I leaned over, I'm a bit shorter than Oscar on his I don't think height is that's important, but in any case, I'm more or less the same height. But in any case, so I tried to reach the floor on the other side, and it's extremely difficult, but it's so hard on your stomach. Because you lie on the splintered edge of that splintered edge, and his edge is actually more splintered than mine. I had quite a clean breakout. His one is very splintered. And I tell you now, if you lean over that and you wiggle now to try and get the key on the floor, you can't really actually touch the floor. But if you now really over quite, it's very challenging, because you don't have anything to hold onto on the other side. And remember, he doesn't have any lower legs, so his front side, his top side is heavier in relation to his lower leg. So he's going to flip over. Doesn't have the same balance.
Maybe he literally went through the hole and was inside and got the key, opened the door, and then came back out.
Yeah, but I tell you now. I thought it would be the issue.
I want to move on.
Sorry, I just want to make this point, because it's very the biggest issue there wasn't whether you could reach or whatever, is the scratching on his stomach. His stomach would have been hurt terribly, and he didn't have a scratch on his stomach.
Interesting.
Okay, I want to move on to Simon. I just want to make a last point about what we're talking about here. Did you guys notice how there's like a blood trail coming out of the toilet, and then there's a wooden plank lying over the blood trail, and then what's kind of odd is the blood trail goes underneath the plank. It's not like the blood trail sort of goes blood trail, there's the plank, it sort of goes over the plank, blood trail continues. It's like the plank got thrown into the toilet after everything happened. Didn't you guys get that impression?
Yeah. We did see that. That was for me the same as the splinters under the tiles, and maybe the gun on the bath mat, and the mat on a drop, and the cell phone on a drop, and all of that. So tried to establish sequence there, but it was very difficult. One of those instances we decided to rather leave it. It's possible that he could have taken it out and then throw the panel back in, whatever. It's difficult to say, but I think before we, I don't know, we still got time, but we never got back to the vest. Can I quickly address that black vest?
Yeah.
Can I quickly?
I just want to ask you just a last question on this. Do you think there were some very big splinters in the toilet bowl? Do you think they got there through normal, like the bullets going through? Because there seem to be some splinters that were really big. Do you think some of those splinters were put in the toilet?
No, I think my toilet had the same sort of splinters in after I broke it down. I took it, I put it in the frame, so I didn't take my door out, but it fitted in the frame, and I bashed it down, and I got from the impact you would get some splinters, and when you push the panel out, you would get more splinters, whatever. Look, as I say, it's very difficult to determine or to guess exactly what could have happened there. You know, he's busy taking it out. You know, maybe kicking things this way, kicking things that way. You get splinters in the passage, which you would not really expect there. You got the casing in the passage. Maybe could have kicked that there. You get the tiles on the wooden splinters. You know, it doesn't really make sense. Let me put it this way. I think something happened, as you said previously, you know, something is missing here, but we never really tried to explain everything. And I think to hook that onto the question previously about why he would have redressed her, and I don't really think that's the best word, put the vest back on and exactly where she would have taken it off. I don't know, but I think our approach has always been to show on measurable grounds the issue at stake, and without necessarily explaining why. In this instance, all we can say is that in terms of hard measurement, and the number of holes versus the number of wounds on a body, the vest is not reconcilable with the shooting incident. I don't really want to go through all of this. It's in the book, but I just want to concentrate on, for example, the chest. Let's call it a fragment wound. I mean, we don't have a hole that you can directly relate to that. But even if you consider the other, we call it rents, it's more like tears. But let's call them holes. Even if we disregard the position and say maybe the vessel slightly turned, whatever, at that stage, the fact of the matter is that fragment wound is, let's say, 1 centimeter in diameter. It's more or less 1 centimeter. And you've got at least 2 big holes. And both of them are much bigger than 1 centimeter. So how can a 1 centimeter fragment that leaves a 1 centimeter fragment wound make 2 holes in the vest? And the shape is off, you know. Mick, you will know the Afrikaans word is a winkelakskier. It's a typical thing you get in rugby, whatever. You grab on somebody's jersey, whatever, you get a sort of a 90-degree tear. That is the type of thing that you get on the vest. It's not a hole made by fragments of or a bullet. If I can try it short, too many holes in the vest, the amount of wounds, and the wounds are also too small for the hole. Then also get the fragment wound get small, tiny little wounds around. You can't really picture that going through a vest. You get little wounds on the stomach, lower stomach, which is also, we don't have any defect in the vest. And then Kelvin showed me, so there's actually something that I've seen before, is there's this one particular photo of the back wound, the 2 wounds on the back, and around that you also get fine spatter. Now would have gone the could have got the which had the vest on. Saying all of this, I don't. It would be nice if we could, but we were not there. It would be nice if you could say why and how and when. We can't say that. All we can say is she didn't wear that vest. In our opinion, based on measurables.
Yeah. Look, besides the size of the holes and the position which you guys are, definitely have a case. What's just so obvious is there's no blood on the vest, right?
Yeah, it's very, very little. And I don't know if you've seen the photo of the exit wound of the elbow. It is a big flaring wound. It's like as big as a tennis ball, maybe a bit smaller. We say the book is about an egg, and that would have rubbed off right.
Have you guys? We've got some of those images where you can see the size based on the swelling in her arm, but you don't actually see the wound that side on. Do you guys see it from the back?
Yeah, I think they have those images.
Yeah, we have those photos.
Yeah, we've seen it from the inside.
If I can mention a theory, we are theorizing a lot today.
Yeah.
Well, yesterday, as I got your questions, I actually did a Google search whether women like to sleep naked.
Oh God, do I have to answer that one?
And I just feel that it's something that's very uncomfortable for a lot of women. And I'm not sure whether Reva was comfortable with sleeping topless. So if Reva was found in a toilet without the vest on, or was found without the vest on, which meant that she was sleeping topless that night. And her friends and the people that know her very well may have said, this is not Reva.
Yeah.
This is not something that she's comfortable with. And that would have raised a lot of questions. Also, he knew that Sander was on his house, and he wanted to preserve her modesty.
And I think he wanted to bring some dignity to the situation. And again, now some people might say when he put it on, it would have smeared on, but at least that would have been lesser blood than.
What comes through to me when you look at all this information is. Like you guys in your own narrative have nailed down all these things that are covering up of the crime scene, embellishing of the crime scene, stuff that's separate to what we've come up with. We've come up with other stuff where we say, well, the whole thing going down the stairs is a totally embellished narrative, right? Everything that went on going down the stairs, praying to God to help her, all this kind of stuff. And I think what seemed even unlikely to Lisa and me was that when you put these two together, the sheer volume of crap that was going on, the sheer amount of acting and pantomiming and bullshit that was going on, it beggars belief. But when you then go and you look at what's happened subsequent, and that's where I say you can take the science and the law further by going into a narrative. And if you look at, I know we were speaking to Beth Karras, the Deputy District Attorney in New York, and I said to her, did you know that as recently as I think it was December 8th last year, Oscar was in court, and there are lots of photos of him smiling. There are photos of him with Barry Roux smiling, and he's supposed to be given bail, and it's like, well, this is not a big deal, everyone's smiling and so on. Are you telling me that 6 months later he's a broken man when he's facing sentencing? Yeah. All I'm trying to get at is this guy's an actor. He's acted his whole life. He's acting not just in this role of the criminal as the broken man, and he's actually the victim here. I'm just saying he's been acting his whole life that he's an able-bodied guy. That was his acting performance all along. He acts with an ITV interview. He acts in court, different roles. Whenever the questioning gets difficult, he starts crying or whatever. And it's not a little bit of acting. It's a massive amounts of acting. It's overacting. And when we hear about him at the crime scene, we also hear these incredible displays of emotion. We hear him making an arrangement with God that he will even dedicate Reba's life to God if God saves. And I mean, it's just even and that same narrative of I will dedicate Reba's life to you if you save her. And then in the ITV interview he says, I'd like to believe Reba's in heaven and that she would want me to not go to jail. She'd want me to serve charities, whatever. There's something incredibly arrogant about that idea, that hypothesis, that I'm going to, on behalf of someone that I've killed, make arrangements. I don't know, it's just, but they line up. It's the same kind of effed up psychology. Sorry.
It's difficult to separate the real emotions from the act. He certainly acted. I've seen the ITV video. It wasn't authentic, and I think the vast majority of people that watch it feels the same, and you can't fool everyone. So
I mean, I've got right in front of me, I've got this article here where they say truth or stunt, right?
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. And
I think I read that in Huisgenoot, and most of them felt it wasn't authentic or wasn't
the subtext on it, they say Oscar's first TV interview since Reba's murder reveals a man more concerned about himself than his victim, experts say. Now, what I want to say that's really interesting, I don't know if you picked this up, Lisa, in the narrative that I wrote not long ago in White Horse 2, is You Magazine have been, they've been sort of close with the Pistoriuses all along. They've been absolutely integral to Oscar's sympathetic narrative. They've had articles on how's he going to rebuild his life, how's he going to find love, Jenna staying with him, the support from his brother, the support from his sister. It's article after article after article in You Magazine, which is that magazine's about the biggest magazine in South Africa. It's like a tabloid magazine. That and Huisgenoot are the two biggest magazines in South Africa. And then suddenly you get this magazine, this is the cover of it, which shows, I don't know if you can see that, but it says he wants to play the victim and save himself. Now, what I think is interesting about this article is, I think You Magazine are feeling done in because Oscar didn't give them the interview instead of ITV. Now, I think they, in a way, I think the Pistorius has sort of strung You Magazine along, saying, we'll consider you guys. We'll give you the exclusive after the verdict, and then to suddenly get this negative publicity after the ITV, I think it's a little bit of sour grapes from Huisgenoot and You Magazine, who feel they thought they expected to get this interview, and because they didn't, for the first time, there's this negative coverage of Oscar about him being a victim. I just thought that was just because story after story after story is Oscar in a positive light. It's kind of on his side, all along. And then when he gives the interview to ITV, then suddenly there's a bit of a.
The latest Huisgenoot has got a story in about Annelies Burgess, the
really?
3 years in the heart of the Pistorius house. So Huisgenoot is playing as the wind blows. I know them quite well. Then that was quite negative, as long as it's sensational, they find it.
Hey, so the one thing I think.
Okay, I want to get to Simon, but before we get to Simon, I just want to touch on a last thing in terms of language. Are you guys there?
Yeah.
I just want to touch on the last thing. I'm not going to be able to see you now because I'm going to be reading. So if I seem a bit distracted, don't worry. What I'm going to propose to you guys is. I'm someone who writes a lot. I've got a bit of a journalistic background and so on, and I found Judge Masipa stumbling over words in the judgment, unable to pronounce certain things, also saying certain things that just don't seem like her vocabulary. And again, what I'm saying now is speculative, it's hypothetical, I can't prove it. I'm just saying it's an interesting conjecture. And what I'm trying to get at here is quite sort of mischievous. what I'm basically speculating is that isn't the person, the spin doctor for the Pistorius, whether it's Annalisa Burgess or somebody else or some legal person, isn't the same spin doctor for them the spin doctor who may have been involved in writing Masipa's judgment, talking about broken man and so on? And you can say, well, that's an outlandish claim, but I'm just going to quote very, very briefly just a couple of. One thing we've got to all acknowledge here is at the end of the day, Masipa made two surprising judgments, two questionable judgments, and she made them back to back. And people were like, okay, so I'm going to start with. I'm reading now from Oscar the Pistorius's response to your article, right? To your book and to your claims. And what I want to emphasize here isn't the content of what they're saying. So I'm not reading this to say that I agree with what they're saying or I disagree. I mean, I do disagree with what they're saying, but what I am trying to do is highlight that this isn't Arnold Pistorius's voice when he's saying this. This is someone who's communicating on his behalf, and this is the way that they communicate. So I'm just going to quickly read this to you. Again, I'm just really quoting what they're saying to highlight something. Okay, so the first one is, he says, this is Arnold Pistorius via press statement. Despite 3 years of an often vicious parallel trial against Oscar in the public domain, we as Oscar's family have scrupulously refrained. I don't think Arnold would ever use those words, scrupulously refrained, from commenting on the many outrageous and spurious allegations. I doubt he would ever use the word spurious, that have been bandied about in the media, as well as legions of self-appointed armchair jurors. Now, I don't think he would ever say bandied about in the media. I just don't think as a mostly Afrikaans guy he would use those words. I don't think he would use the word legions. And what I mentioned to Lisa at the time is I still said to her, why on earth is Arnold Pistorius referring to armchair jurors? Because there are no jurors in South Africa, right? Yeah. And the thing that I said to Lisa at the time was I said, isn't this a little bit of a slip? Because Lisa and I have written quite a few narratives about them where we've talked about motive and all this sort of negative stuff. They've never once acknowledged us or criticized us, which is a big feather in your cap, the fact that you've written one book and they have. But what I was just saying to Lisa at the time was, isn't it strange that they refer to armchair jurors when there are no jurors in South Africa? And Lisa's pen name and the name of her blog and the name on her Twitter handle is Juror13. And I thought that was a bit of a slip, a mental slip to be referring to other critics of theirs as armchair jurors. You could say, well, no, I think that's a bit of I think that's you being a bit imaginative there. But let me just carry on reading from the statement. So this is going back to Arnold Pistorius. He says, their so-called investigation is based on what they claim to be new, inverted commas, evidence. There is no new evidence. Every photograph was presented, and here's that part to highlight. Every shred of evidence was dissected in the intensive 43-day trial. Obviously, that is completely not true. Here's some evidence that wasn't dissected. For example, the phone. We don't know what happened to the phone. The second pair of jeans wasn't dealt with at all. The bedroom door was literally not. The tent, yeah.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you there, but Huisgenoot, you actually sent that press release to us to comment on, and I particularly referred to the thing about every piece of evidence dissected, whatever. So I've quite an exhaustive answer to that. I didn't publish the whole of it. There was part of it in Huisgenoot, where I actually said that all I can actually say is I challenge him to open debate.
Do you think Huisgenoot were fair to you? Do you think they put your case across fairly?
Yeah, I don't know. There was this one article where I know the journalist quite well, and she sent me look, the press statement from the Pistorius that came out just after our book, when it sort of broke in the international media and all of that, and then
you got published on the 20th of April on Daily Maverick, and I think the 22nd or 23rd in the Daily Mail, and then their press statement came out the 23rd of April.
Yeah, around about then. In any case, so then Huisgenoot sent me comments by Annelies Burgess, the spokesperson of the Pistorius, and it's very much in line with that press release. But I could see that it was answers that are questions that Huisgenoot you sent to them or her, whatever, and then she sort of answered them. And then I had to reply on certain things. She now said, yeah, but you guys are this and this and this, and they're just amateurs and this and that, and the evidence, the sect that Gerinel tried his best, he couldn't prove anything, whatever. So then I sort of replied, yeah, but he didn't, trying your best is not to say you did everything right. For example, you're a rugby team, you can do everything right. You can try your best. You can pick the biggest players, and you can try your best, but it's not to say you're going to do the right things. You can follow the wrong strategy and all of that. So in any case, I don't want to make long stories. So I gave quite an exhaustive reply to Huisgenoot based on essentially that statement by them. But Huisgenoot, I think they were generally positive. They talked about our previous work in Lot's case, whatever said, it was received positively by experts. So they didn't try to put us down. I would have liked them to put more of my sort of direct wording in. I said specifically, for example, the steel plate. You can't talk about all evidence being dissected and all of it. Where's the steel plate? Damage to the bedroom door. Something big to me, I talked about Simon, is the little wound on Riva's arm, top back of Riva's arm. That it's not any from the door. And my big question there was, let's forget about what it is. I'm not saying it's a pellet. No, I'm not saying that. Even in the book, we're not saying that. All we're saying is, again, it's consistent. The biggest issue is why was it not recorded? Why it didn't serve in court? In this context, we're talking now about is how can you say all evidence was presented, dissected, every photo if it wasn't? But coming back to your point, I think Huisgenoot was, okay, but we were given some opportunities to.
So I just want to say, in that statement that the family made, all these fancy English words that I wouldn't even use, they're using, and then interestingly, the Judge Masipa also uses this thing about there's not a shred of evidence to show there's an argument. That sounds to me not like Judge Masipa's own thoughts or own words. It sounds like she's reading from a Pistorius prepared thing. Really, I remember saying to Lisa at the time, does this sound like the kind of thing Judge Masipa would be saying over a cup of tea?
So I have an interesting thing to say.
I just don't think she would use that kind of language. She used other language as well, but let me just go back to the
I want to, after you're done, Nick, I want to further that point. There's something I want to say. So
I just want to come back to the Pistorius press statement. They also refer to two armchair sleuths. I don't think sleuths is a word that Arnold Pistorius even knows about. Sleuths is a very, very English word that very few people use. Most people would say detectives. And then the other thing, which sounds like the kind of thing a journalist would say, and something I mentioned to Lisa is this is again in that press statement. They talk about gutter journalism, completely devoid of fact. The only people in the world who speak like that, who talk about gutter journalism, are journalists. Journalists referring to other journalists talk about gutter journalism. Nobody else uses that term, and so I just thought that was really, really odd. I'm just going to quote quickly now. I just want to quote quickly now from Judge Masipa's sentence. These are her words. This is the judge's words. She says, it says, the judge was adamant that the public perception that Pistorius had tried to kill Steenkamp after an argument was entirely incorrect, and that it was up to her, to set the record straight. And these are her words. There is not a shred of evidence placed before this court that supports such a perception. The judge added there was no evidence of any abuse between the young couple. And then it says, refusing to be swayed by public opinion, Judge Masipa was also adamant that ignoring Pistorius's vulnerability as a double amputee could be an injustice. Yeah, so I don't know. I just found the fact that she used those words. I know it's not conclusive. I'm just saying I thought it was a bit interesting.
Just for the you know that Unleashed Burgess, you remember she used to work for special assignment.
Yeah.
She ended up used to be she used to be investigative journalist, which now seems to have sold the soul to Pistorius. In my opinion, it's not. I really can't see. Yeah, well, if she's paid, it's not a problem. She's doing a job for the Pistorius, it's not a problem. I'm not saying she's inherently doing something wrong, but it's just difficult for me to think that investigative journalists can actually believe St. Oscar's version. But if it's a job, then she has to sleep at night and do it. But just point I actually just wanted to make is that she's fine for those statements, I think.
There was something interesting. So, Nick, along the lines of what you're talking about, just to kind of further support that, because it sounds very conspiracy theorist, right? Like, oh, come on, like, you know, this judge she wasn't handed a script, you know. And I think, I mean, obviously, it's not as quite cut and dry as that, but I mean, I think there's a lot of evidence, and when you start adding it up, to really question what the hell is going on behind the scenes. So I have somebody that I speak to online who has some very, very credible sources in Pretoria. They shared this story with me that this is going to be a little bit of a like friend of a friend type thing. But I've talked to these people, so I've verified this, that there was a dinner party, and this was in the February-March timeframe of this year, where this person, we'll call this person the source, was at a dinner party at the house of Arnold Pistorius, and Arnold told these few very close dinner guests that the most that Oscar would receive is 3, maybe 3.5 years. That's the most that, not that he would receive, the most that he would have to serve is 3 or 3.5 years. How can he make that statement? How can you actually, you know, there's a difference between saying...
Was this after the culpable homicide thing?
This was in February, March of this year. So we're talking like 3 months ago. Yeah. So he had this conversation with a very small group of dinner guests, and there's somebody that I know who knows this dinner guest very well, and it's a very credible source. So, you know, again, I mean, it's a little bit of, you know, there's a couple degrees there in between. But this person, they have every reason to believe, is a credible source. And Arnold told this person that the most that Oscar will have to serve is 3 to 3.5 years. And
well, you know,
that's very troubling to me, obviously.
What I observed to Lisa at the time, because I was in court on July 6th, I said this at the time that it was happening. I said it to Mark Batchelor, and I was like, because I'm standing there and I'm looking at the Pistorius family, and they you know, it's like someone is actually about to be sentenced for murder. This isn't culpable homicide anymore. This is murder. Yeah. And they're so relaxed. Oscar seems, everyone actually seems far more relaxed on this day of all days than on the other 3 days. Oscar looks less broken than his look. Yeah,
Oscar looked quite very relaxed that day.
He did.
Yeah, you're getting these little moments where family members are hugging each other and smiling and whatever. It's just like, and I'm sitting there and I'm a little bit tense myself, and I'm like, is there something I don't know here? I mean, how can you be so relaxed at a murder sentencing? You know, and then you start getting this funny feeling. Is the answer to that question, is there something that I don't know? Yes. is the thing that I don't know, the fact that you do know something that I don't know, and that's why you're so relaxed. And there was a moment that was eerie for me, where here I am in court and the proceedings are about to begin. I'm still going to flesh out the little nuances in detail, because there's more to say than what I'm going to say now. But what was really interesting was there's a moment where the verrichting and the case was about to start, and virtually everyone in the gallery was seated, and the only person standing was Arnold Pistorius, and he was standing with his back to the legal counsels on both sides. So Arnold Pistorius is essentially the only person standing, and he's sort of standing right in the front of this whole crowd. And I sort of looked at him, and I first thought, maybe he doesn't really realize what he's doing, or maybe he's just looking around. And then I noticed that he wasn't just glancing around, or he was just maybe looking for someone. He was actually scanning slowly from face to face, as though he was trying to calibrate who he recognized, who he didn't recognize, who was there, who wasn't there. It's different to kind of just looking across the room, getting an idea there may be 100 people here. This was registering people's faces, almost like I think I've said to Lisa, it's like a Terminator. It was like computing who was there, like slowly. That was the one thing. And the other thing that I noticed in his gaze, and you can say, well, you've got an active imagination, maybe it is that. But I said to Lisa, he had that kind of look on his face that seemed to me like satisfaction. Not evil and not calculated. It just seemed like he'd pulled his strings, and it achieved what he meant to achieve, and he was like looking around and kind of, in a private sense, he was just feeling like, yeah, this is the outcome I want to go. And what I'm trying to say is, this was my observation then. I didn't know what the outcome was going to be an hour later, an hour and a half later. So when the outcome an hour and a half later was this acceptable outcome to the Pistoriuses, that sort of behavior matched. It matched, like, yeah, this is, we're okay with this. And if you look at the situation, I've actually got a newspaper here. They actually say in this newspaper, this is the report. I don't know if you can see that, but basically says that they suspect Oscar may only serve 1 year. They actually think that it's possible that he may be out in 1 year, and another group have actually said that they anticipate Oscar performing at the next Olympics in 2020. There's already been an indication from SASCOC that he will be allowed to, and there's also been an indication where someone said even if he does serve 3 years, he'll have at least a year to train. And all I'm trying to say is, all of this seems awfully like, you had this thing against you, we'll beat it, we'll get over it, and you can get on with your life. And I don't know, and that's why I feel like,
well, they've succeeded.
Especially the four of us are like these lone voices crying out, and the media doesn't even take us as seriously as I think common sense people would. People just considering these questions. You don't have to say we're right on the answers, but consider the questions. It raises a hell of a lot of very worrying things about ordering things like justice, and yes, justice in the eyes of the world, in the eyes of the public. Yeah. And this sort of things happening.
Yeah. Okay, so there's
the spirit. Judge Masipa was very, very sympathetic to Oscar right from the start, and I think she greatly resented what happened in the appeals court. And a lot of the words that she used in her sentencing here, I don't think she believed it. She talked about the seriousness of murder, and it doesn't take away from the act of murder. I don't think she believed any of that. She doesn't believe this was murder. She was forced to render a verdict on something that she didn't believe in.
I think there was one thing in particular that bothered me. I didn't listen to the whole proceeding, but for her to say nothing that the court does will bring her back, I mean, that's not a legal argument.
Yeah, I know.
That is just not a legal argument. It's got nothing to do whether a sentence can bring somebody back or not. We have to look at the seriousness of the crime, and that underlined her sympathy for me. I think that a lot of people have said here, and I think it's not without merit, is that Masipa had some of the difficulties, polio or something when she was small. You can see she's also sort of wobbling, also not walking properly. Yeah. And I think in that sense, she maybe had a sympathy for Oscar, you know, also as a sort of disabled person. But I think from the start, it was absolutely clear that she had a lot of sympathy for him. And I think you can see it in the sense that she tries to justify things in the judgment, trying to emphasize, you know, certain things, trying to convince herself.
Yeah. Okay, so there's two. I think the two last things that we want to talk about, because we should probably start to wrap it up. It's gone very long. So the two things that we want to talk about are Simon. I know that you guys have had some experience with him, the medical examiner, I think from the last case that you wrote about, as well as this case. So we want to get your take on him. You know, we were very disturbed by the fact that he was able to testify off camera, that they hid everything, that like you couldn't even record his voice. You know, I'm thinking, like, this is a medical examiner. What does he care what the world hears? I mean, he deals with this stuff every day. It's not his position to decide what the public should hear or shouldn't hear. I thought that was very unusual. So I want to get your take on that.
So that he was brought in kind of in the place of another medical examiner. You know, like originally it wasn't going to be him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So but the thing is, he did the autopsy, he did the post-mortem, so he had to testify. Nobody else. We're talking about Simon. I have Simon now. Now it's very difficult for me to talk about Simon without getting very upset. So I'm going to choose
my words. Let it out.
Extremely careful. But yeah, in my mind, you could. I want to choose my words now carefully. It's just you could compare him with the criminal. He's out to mislead the court. In this specific instance, whether he was a state witness or not, and I'm not implying that he had any ties with the Pistorius, or may or may not have. They may go back on or whatever. I'm not saying that is the case. Or he may have had some reason to be sympathetic towards Oscar, or whatever the case may be. The way he trivialized Viva's wounds, a borders criminal, he talked about those wounds as if they were mosquito bites. But that is not even where it started. It started off just a poor post-mortem, where. And it's demonstrable. You can go and look at the autopsy report, the post-mortem report. You can go and look at it, and you can look at the wounds. This is not a medical opinion. I mean, I'm dealing with a lot of pathologists, whatever. And the one actually told me, yeah, you know what I like? You're not making a medical opinion here. It's a geometrical opinion or whatever. You can look at the wound, and you can look at whatever Simon wrote in the post-mortem. You can look at the wound, certain features there, and you don't see that he wrote about that. For example, the wounds on the back. You clearly see striations in the wound. You know, it's not our opinion, it's there. It's on various photos. And you see the various stages. You see it freshly, sort of just after, you know, when the police arrived there, they took a photo just about 5 o'clock. You can see it's still fairly fresh, and then you can see later it got more sort of white as it dried out, and then you can see later the autopsy just suddenly appeared, you know. So those striations, for example, you would think that the medical examiner would just record it. You can't just say you see two abrasions on the back, and that is basically all he said. So it started off with a badly explained post-mortem report that wouldn't be helpful to a court. So now it gets to court.
I just want to add this quickly. You know what was a surprise to me was, okay, obviously that whole narrative from Simon was missing. I don't think they even allowed it to be, it wasn't reported. I can't remember if they even allowed it to be tweeted. I don't think that was even allowed either. Can you remember, Lisa? Could they tweet it?
They allowed the report. Well, she did after the fact because I don't think she really understood how Twitter works.
Yeah, I mean that live tweet what he was saying. But anyway, what I'm trying to get at is when we saw those images of the back of Reeva's head, it kind of changed things for me. Like I understood that Reeva had taken a head wound. But I kind of got the idea that it was. I don't want to say it was superficial, but I kind of got the idea that it was sort of through the top of her head. And even though that we'd seen that image with a little bit of her brain on the thing, one still kind of got the idea that maybe it was survivable. But that's because you're not seeing the exit wound. As soon as you see the exit wound and you see that big glob of, you don't need a genius or a pathologist to say that's not survivable.
Yeah, but I think that's coming back to, I think what you said in the beginning of this particular point is that, and I've spoken to a lot of pathologists, it was important to show the photos properly, important to the judge, because it's public domain, it's in public interest. And again, like I explained previously, when you look at a proper layout of a scene, whatever, you understand the context, you see distances, it makes sense to you. When you talk about a head wound, it doesn't really make sense to you unless you see how it looks like. For example, also the exit wound of the arm. We just talk about the exit wound. I think it's just 2 centimeter kind of thing. Meantime it's 6 by 4, which is quite a bit larger. If we talk about the wounds on the chest and wherever the case may be, you get such better understanding of the dynamics and all of that when you actually see the wound. I think Simon tried to conceal his bad post-mortem to some extent. He realized he's quite notorious for the fact that he would sort of actually just supervise the post-mortem, stand there in the other system, sort of cut
in the Inga Lots case, did he say that he didn't think that the hammer, the shape of the hammer as a murder weapon shape matched the shapes on her head? He said that
he was the defense expert there. They brought him in. He mainly was the issue about the sizes. He could circular sort of indentations, and there was a particular photo that seemed to be taken at the angle, and he said no, the wound size doesn't, it's not reconcilable with the hammer, and he doesn't think that actually the type of wound you would get by hammer. But I mean, a lot of other pathologists disagreed with him. But that's the problem in South Africa. If somebody like Simon, because he's the head of pathology at Pretoria, which is one of the bigger universities in South Africa, so somebody like that goes to court, and I think that is a fundamental problem in this case as well. I think Nel had too much respect for Simon, and he didn't. So a lot of people would come to me and we talk about this, and they would say, "Yeah, but how would Nel not? Let's talk about the wound on Reeva's back. How would he not see that, or how would he not ask that?" And I say that is why you get an expert witness. Nel is not a pathologist; he's not a medical expert; he's not a sound expert. That is why you get expert witnesses to help the advocate, whether it's for the prosecution, the defense, whatever, and to help assist the court to put all the information in front of the court so that the court can decide whatever. So if Gert Simon didn't explain or mention the striations and the skin press, the fact that the skin was pressed downwards on the back, if he doesn't explain that to the court, how would Nel now be able to take it any further? Because you must remember, very importantly, you can't cross-examine your own witness. So Nel couldn't push Gert Simon really much further. So Gert Simon said, now for example, we talk about the abraded nipple. Now even Gert Simon, they acknowledged that it was a freshly abraded nipple. Now then they just stopped there. So why was the question never really asked? No, as a medical detective,
what
in my opinion, what could have caused it? Because Reeva would not have gone to bed with the abraded nipple. And it could not have happened in the toilet. So what, or no, even if we forget about all possible timeline things, just to say what typically would cause such abrasion. You know, is it material maybe rubbing on a nipple, or is it maybe a blunt force, whatever the case may be. You know, just running through all of those possibilities, and they just sort of left it there. You know, a big problem I had was Simon in particular was, and I've discussed this with a lot of experts as well, and it's the same in the Lott's case as well, but it's very selective. It is that he would look at the wounds individually instead of in totality. Yeah. For example, Riva had bruises on the upper arm, bruises there on the wrist, then on the shin, then on the thigh. Whatever. So then he would say, for example, yeah, but regarding the one on the shin, yeah, but all of us walk around with this like that on any given day. Yes, maybe, but not with 12 others.
Did Oscar have any, I mean, I know this isn't Simon's domain, but did Oscar have any bruises other than his shoulder? Did anyone pick up any cuts, bruises on Oscar?
Not as far as I know, and I don't know how well they examined him. Yeah. But as far as I know, they didn't. But yeah, I just want to close down on Simon just to say, or you can ask anything more about him. But I know I don't want to say too much now, but there are other pathologists in South Africa. It's not going to take Simon any longer. It's not very popular. But I think for one particular reason also, yeah, is that in night pathology, it's a sort of the handbook of pathologists. Went through the whole thing about gastric emptying and all of that. We stopped right before the section dealing with delayed digestion because of stress. Now, again, without saying that was the reason, my problem again with Simon is he put everything, all the possibilities on the table. Then the court, then you could deal with the court, you know. But for example, delayed digestion cause of stress is a very real phenomenon. You know, yeah, he had to put it in front of the court. And that's actually, it's actually, in my opinion, a very plausible explanation. Because I don't believe that you don't that late, and it then makes sense.
No, I think Simon could have been a lot more convincing on the whole thing of when Reva likely ate, and you know, like to say, well, she absolutely didn't eat before 10 p.m. I mean, that's virtually certain. Something like that, you know. It just seemed a bit too wishy-washy that you could take it either way, I thought.
But I think just in general, it was just that is a good example of it being, as you say, wishy-washy. But I think in general, all the roots was just not. It was not helpful. It was sort of just briefly touching on issues and without. And again, you know, I think it's a poor excuse. I mean, even in the Lott's case, the parents said, you know, we want people to see the woods. A lot of people now ostracized the Riva's parents because of the asking, you know, the photos to be shown, whatever. But in many cases, the family want people to see the extent of the wounds. And in this particular case, I think they should have done that during the trial, the first trial, that Masipa, as a woman, and I say there's a lot of sensitivity and respect here, could see the nipple, the braided nipple. That's one thing we've kept back.
Well, I wonder whether. You know, like
then she could have associated.
The Pistorius and the Steenkamps actually had a deal. They actually had a kind of a contract. And the contract included that you don't talk about X and you don't talk about Y. And I wonder whether there wasn't part of the contract between Oscar and the Steenkamps was, can you not show the photos of Reva? In other words, the Steenkamps are getting, I think, 6,300 Rand a month at that stage. And they could easily have said, you know, can you ask that the photos not be shown? And then ultimately, when things have worked out the way they have, they've said, okay, we want the photos to be shown now. That was their last thing that they could do. The other thing is also, I'm just saying this, it's just common knowledge. But Oscars, I think, made money out of this case, whether it's directly or indirectly. We know that. Well, I've heard this from a source I consider reliable. They said ITV paid someone £500,000, which is about 10 million rand, for that interview, and all of that money could have gone to Barry Roo. We don't know. It didn't necessarily have to go to Oscar, but it was nevertheless an income. But the Steenkamps have also made money. They've made, at one stage they were making, I think, $100,000 from NBC. I'm not sure how much they made from their book deal, but what I'm trying to get at is there are underlying arrangements going on, that we're not always aware of. But the images definitely shifted a lot. What hit us in the face was just how clean Reva's face looked when one would have expected an Oscars version, at least blood on that side of her face. Yeah, so we're now at almost the 3.5 hour mark of this interview, so we really need to wrap up. The last thing I want to just touch on really, really quickly is what do you guys think about the cricket bat thing? I mean, I know you've put that forward, and the media seem to have latched onto that with the most interest. What is your genuine, are you saying that almost in the way that I mentioned, the prosthetic legs being thrown out the window, it's like maybe, or are you quite attached to that as likely? I mean, Lisa and I believe there was definitely a severe argument leading to someone dying. But the part that I want to, and I mean, what Lisa and I have argued about amongst ourselves before you guys came out with this was we thought it's possible that there was hitting, but the problem we had was how can you connect specific injuries or bruises to the bat? You can't. We thought you can't. Absolutely, without doubt, say, well, that's definitely a bad wound. That was before your thing came out. So what I want to sort of put to you guys is just, are you saying that it's possible, or are you saying that you think it's pretty certain that the, first of all, because there are basically two wounds. The one is to a spine up high on her body. It's like a small ovalish sort of wound.
There's two of them.
Yeah, and then there's a wound lower down, sort of on her buttocks area, that's more like a bruise. What do you think?
Okay, Calvin, I think if you can maybe do the extension.
No, I don't think we ever said it. It is for sure 100% the bat. I think we are pretty sure that those wounds are not reconcilable with any event that took place inside the toilet. It was not.
Do you think the bat made those striations do you think the bat made those striations in the wound? The wood of the bat made.
It could have. The bats. If you look closely at the rounded area of the bat's point, it's rough enough to have made those. Obviously, we can't say for sure. It's just that the bat was on the scene. It was part of the whole sequence of events that took place. So, on a balance of likelihoods, it's most likely the bat. I know that some other people have argued it could have been the gun, the handle of the gun. We don't agree necessarily with that, but that's another possibility. But the bat was featured.
Yeah. I think I just want to, if I can just interrupt. I think it's important for us. You don't always get the opportunity to, in the media, to put it. I mean, we tried in the book to do it as well, but without saying, listen, it's a bat, or starting with that. What we did is based on the striations, the direction of the striations, and the direction in which the skin is clearly pressed. You see that on a lot of photos, it's pressed downwards. So then we looked at, if you fall against anything, the skin is going to be pressed upwards. If you look at so we can exclude the magazine rack. Or people might say, you fell against the toilet. If you fall against anything, the skin is going to be pressed upwards, and you clearly see the skin being pressed downwards. And then, so you can exclude that, and I don't want to go into long stories about the deflected bullet, but the same principle doesn't work with that. So now we excluded basically those two possibilities, and then you go and look at various. But I mean, we must be able to at least try and explain it. You know what something must have made it. So now you see a downward pressing of the skin. It's a concentrated impact. So now you start thinking towards the bat. But what is then telling is the rough edge of the bat. That tip is definitely splintered. There's a lot of photos that show that. And then the dimension is very important. Now, again, you can't do it to the nanomillimeter. It's not what we're trying to say. We can't say it's a match. We can say it's a fit. It's a fitting. In terms of dimension, say 15 millimeters from side to side the wound, and then the bat 15 millimeters. It's got a rough edge. It does give you that idea of a concentrated blunt. It's typical blunt impact from top to bottom. Bat was on the scene. You could see there was some action with the bat. If you look at the handle, it's not. Yes, in the end, we included in our sort of version, but we never really actually.
I just want to clarify something quickly. My initial response was I thought that it wasn't the bat because I thought, and I'm speaking in a very general way here, that if someone took a blow to their back, like a full-on blow with a bat, that would leave like a big round bruise, right? But if I'm imagining this right, are you kind of suggesting that there was quite a rapid downward blow, and it just nicked the edge of her spinal thing, and it sort of chipped, sort of cut off a piece of skin?
Yeah. It was just a shake.
Yeah. Look, we know there are two wounds now. One of the first things I picked up is right on the spine. Right on the spine now is a thoracic vertebra. Let's call it the knobs. If you bend forward, you see that knobs protruding out. So what I thought from the beginning, and I still think that's so you see the knobs, and then there was remember the bat is not flat; it's now turned. Pull it vertically, and it just shaved on, and it deflected onto the bottom one. And then you did that. Obviously I don't have a human being here that I can test it on, but I've got boxes. I've got the boxes, and I play cricket bat, and it is if you get that similar, you get that similar type of shape, and think back to the shapes of the bedroom door on the side. It's very much the same. We never mentioned that in the book, because it could be coincidence, but it's very much the same type of shape, sort of. But you can see it's concentrated impact, and you have to ask yourself what can actually look at. If you consider anything in that house, what can really make such a concentrated? I'm really explain the word concentrated impact, because that is what I spoke to a lot of pathologists about. If you fall against a magazine rack, okay, we've experienced now in directionality, whatever. If you fall against a magazine rack, it's not going to be that concentrated impact. It's going to be a wider area.
More of a shape.
You can rub yourself against a chair, for example. It's covering a big area. You're not going to get that. That is a blow, and the skin is pressed down. It really only takes it to a bat. Because on a scale of probability, if you start looking at the dimensions, then 15 millimeters. Look at the rough edge, and you can see also in that wound, is striations. You can just see. And again, it's just a pity that it wasn't investigated. But, it's one thing for us now to put the possibility of the bat on the table. I think with a good reason. And yes, we do put it in our version, but in our version, eventually it's a hypothetical thing where we say chase it around and all of that, but that is after we looked at it thoroughly earlier in the book. It's not just saying it because it sounds very dramatic and sensational, but it's about looking at first excluding this defensive version, excluding the state version, then looking at other possibilities, and it is very doable. As I say, a bat just 45 degrees like that, hitting on that knob, you're gonna get that.
Just touching it,
you're just punching it, and it's gonna deflect down. Maybe just shaving the next one, then just
And then what about
it's terribly hard blow, but I mean it's a significant blow. And actually, just last week I was actually giving a presentation at the festival, and I tripped over heat and I fell back onto the table. You have to fall very hard, and I fell quite hard, and I had a slight bruise, but you're never ever gonna get something like that. And just quick, very very briefly dealing with the big. In my opinion, it's not my opinion. It's measurably big contusion on a buttocks.
Yeah.
Again, that's not something you're gonna get from falling onto something. I tell you that is a clap. She was smacked. That is a smack. If I see how hard I fell onto that table last week, I thought I was pulling myself to death. And your buttocks is designed to absorb impact as well.
And of course, Simon said
you
that
guys have got photos of that contusion in your book. I mean, you can actually see it. It's you can see it like
So he said in his report that it was from the hip wound exploding inside of her, but you don't believe that.
No, that makes no sense whatsoever.
The thing is, that is a classic example where I am not a medical. Yes, I've got physiology theory. I've got I'm not medical background, but I think even the layperson can see that's just rubbish. Simon's explanation there. But what I would do is to discuss it with a pathologist, and I've discussed it with 2 or 3 pathologists, and I just can't see if Simon is coming. So Simon is doing his absolute best to cover for why my question there is, why didn't he just consider blunt impact? Why didn't he say, no, it couldn't be blunt impact because this and this and this? So he comes in with one theory and he sticks with that. Then he feels with his fingers and he does the fluorescent thing and he still doesn't find anything, but he still says it's that. So why can't he say, listen, could not be blunt impact, and if not, why? So he was like steering away from that, and that is Nickel now here in South Africa, corporal punishment, grew up with that. That's the type of thing you get after being smacked. Not falling on.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And not, again, Simon's theory of the bullet, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Well, like I said before, I mean, there were quite a few things in that book that really made us rethink a lot of things that we've been thinking for a couple of years. So kudos to you guys. You really did some great work.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it was awesome.
And as I say, we're not necessarily done with it. We just look at the. I don't think we're going to expand our website a bit, and we're going to look into certain areas. You would, for example, have noticed that we didn't look into the whole cell phone issues. Carl having the phone and all of that. That's a different type of investigation. I think we wanted to look at the measurable stuff now. Maybe that's something in the future that we can collaborate on with. I think it's important for us.
What do you guys think the time of death is? What's your time of death? Sorry, not time of death, time of when she was shot, basically.
Oh, that's more your...
Sorry, I didn't hear the question very well.
Time of the shot?
The time of the shot? If we take Johnson's time of he started his call at 3:16, ended at about 3:17, and then he had 4 to 5 shots a little moment later, so sometime just after 70 minutes past 3. That's when she died.
So for the if you look at the phone records, though, the thing I initially thought that too. There's a couple of calls that were made to security, the Silver Lake security, Silver Woods, right? God, it's been so long. But there was a couple of calls that were made. One was by Dr. Stipp, and one was by one of Oscar's neighbors to the side. And both of those calls were reporting the gunshots. We know Dr. Stipp testified, to one of those phone calls that he made. And those phone calls to security were actually logged around the 3:15 time frame. I'm speaking a little general. I don't have the records in front of me right now. And of course, each of those calls took a little bit of time to actually get through and talk to somebody. So if you look at those, when I did the math, I tend to think she was probably shot around 3:14. And it's significant because Mr. Stander, Johann Stander, was called at 3:19. So, every minute counts, obviously, especially in this situation. I think there's a lot of evidence to show that she was shot closer to 3:14. So there's a 5-minute time span before he makes any phone calls to anybody, which is, in that type of situation, that's pretty long. Obviously, he needed some time to get her out of the toilet. How long do you think it took him to actually get the door down and pull her out? What's your theory?
Well, let's say he would have called Stander about a minute and a half to 2 minutes after he shot through the door. So in that period of time, he broke the door down. He could have first called Stander and then removed her from the toilet, or he could have removed her partially from the toilet, then went to call Stander and then came back. We don't know the exact sequence. We only have his version, and we know what that's worth. To break open the door and to open it, I think in an emergency situation like that, he could have probably done it in 30, 45 seconds, less than a minute for sure.
How long did it take on your test?
He could have broken it down quickly because he's already shot 4 bullets through the door and he's already damaged the door before shooting.
Yeah. Look at the physical breaking down of the door. It's physically opening the door. In my opinion, we're talking seconds. It's really okay. Depending on where the bed was, and in my opinion, it would have been closed in, but it wasn't a mission to break open the door. I think again, people have got the statistics. He was full of adrenaline. It would have taken a few seconds. Open that door. Exactly, I don't know. I think it would have been inside. Open the door.
In your experiment, Thomas.
I always say time is very relative. Also, what's a minute in one situation may seem long, but you can do a lot in a minute.
In your experiment, did you break down the door after shooting through it?
No, it was a brand new door.
I don't think that the holes in the door made it easier to break it down. So basically, the way that we see it is that there was a couple of strikes before with the gunshots, and there was the gunshots, and maybe he just had one last blow after the shots. That was the perfect shot where he penetrated. He pulled the panels out, and he got the key open the door. That could all have happened in 30. Like he had about a minute and a half to do all of that. That's because that's when he called Stander. There's no indication that he actually pulled the Riva out of the toilet before he called Stander. That's what he said. Because maybe if that was the case, there would have been a lot more blood in the bedroom where he had to go there to pick up his phone and stuff like that. And we don't see a lot of blood out there. So,
although so I think there is a little bit of blood spatter where the to the left of the bed where the holster was found on the night table. the blood spatter that was found on the back area was right in that area. So, that was one thought that maybe got cast off.
I personally don't believe that blood would have been. And I think it looks on maybe to previous points where somebody in the past also mentioned about blood being on the handle. I don't necessarily agree with that, because blood, if you handle somebody, even if your hands are full of blood, you can easily wipe it off, or it dries very quickly.
That's why they had to tell.
And I can't see that he left blood behind. Maybe it would have smeared, but not
if he pulled River out. If he pulled River out and got his hands full of blood and he knew he wanted to go call Stander, he was not going to use his cell phone with bloodied hands, because the cell phone might not even work. He had the towels right there in the bathroom.
Yeah.
And he could have cleaned his hands on that first before he went out.
And the blood, if you wipe your hands, even if they're still red, it's not necessarily gonna.
I don't think the police ever did any testing of blood in the handle, so we don't know what residue there were. So.
No, you're not necessarily going to see that. If I work with blood quite a lot in my experiments, if you handle it dries very quickly, or you just wipe it. It's not that you can touch a white wall, you might not even see it.
Yeah.
But I don't think when he found blood would have.
I think the holy grail of this case, I think what would settle a lot is if, and what would be great is if you guys could be involved, is you use maths and science and animation or whatever. You basically take things like a bullet is going through this door at that height, it's hitting someone. How does that person then react using animation? And then you do the whole mathematical, what do you call it, cosmos, if I can call it that. And you basically animate the whole thing where once you've solved all those equations, because we know how a body responds when it gets shot, we know how the forces of gravity and all that. We know the distance between bullet one and bullet the next one. And all I'm saying is one could take all that information and create an animation. And obviously you painstakingly put it together like pieces of a puzzle, but once you've finished it, you could theoretically show in real time when these shots happened and how what I think is missing is how Reva gets sustained a bullet, and then she responds in that cubicle, and her position changes, and she sustains another bullet. It's one thing to argue it on paper and in a narrative. It's another thing to animate it, where you look at that and you say, yeah, that I understand and that makes sense. And based on that animation, you're also going to get a sense of the timing. You're going to say, that's when that shot went off. That's how long the time took between that one and that one. What I'm saying is, if one could, surely we have all the information we need, given the distances. The door is in a way like a time machine, where the door basically says to you, this is exactly the height that the bullet went through. Yeah. Then there's a change in aim, and the body also changed position behind the door. The body moved there. Then that was the next bullet, and that's giving you now a magical distance between the door, but also we know Reva's body from what point to what point. And at a certain point, you've got to say, well, she must be falling now. She must be, you know what I'm saying? I'm just saying, if one could animate this, I think it would really settle everything. Where
but at the end of the day,
you watch animation and there would be no question, there would be no doubt.
At the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether how she fell or what she did, what happened and which bullet came first. The fact is, she was shot, she was killed. How it happened, we can talk about it, and it becomes almost an academic exercise after a while, but it's really not necessary to get to the truth. So yeah, we can spend a lot of time in trying to create animations, but and I thought about it in the past. Animation is not an easy thing to do. And I'm an expert in animation.
Seeing injuries is the same. It's also helpful. But Judge Greenland said something that was fascinating, and I think in a weird way, the door in the story, the door is both the alpha and the omega in the story, in two senses. in the same way, we see the door and we think, yeah, well, Oscar didn't know what was going on behind the door. Oscar didn't know. Maybe he's right. Maybe he thought it was an intruder. There's this door, which is the gap, where we say, well, now you've got to make an assumption. You've got to make a leap. And Judge Greenland said something very interesting, and he said, imagine there was no door, because essentially the door didn't do anything. The door wasn't a barrier. The bullets went straight through the door. So you can imagine the doors there, then you can imagine there was a slip of see-through plastic, or you can imagine there was no door at all. And all I'm trying to say is, I think there's a bit of a mental block with us where we think, well, there was the door, and the door separated the two of them. Well, we ended up dead. The door didn't do anything to deflect the bullets or to slow them down. The door might as well not have been there. But the fact that the door was...
And the door would not have...
Yeah.
The door would... Like, the way I see it, what's critically important here is that Reva screamed. And that she screamed, and it was shots and became quiet. And I think really that is what's critical here. How the shots happened through the door and exactly how she stood behind the door and all those things. It's good to know, it's nice to know, but it's to me, it's not central to the case here. The screaming, the signs of an argument, and the gunshots, those are the important things. Exactly what happened and all the minor details we can talk about. Yeah, that's interesting and nice to know, to fill in the whole story. But for us,
something you will never know.
The most important parts, like Thomas and I didn't go into all the WhatsApp messages and what happened before, and we didn't really care much about what happened terribly after the gunshots. We talk about it, but our timeline really stopped at the gunshots. Because we figured...
and we just wanted to show that this version was not true in terms of practical. Curtains hanging from the floor, light would have gone in, showing specific focus on the small fan, and trying to tell people, and I really think this is where Masipa didn't understand. Gerrinal didn't understand the importance of it. He did not move the fans. His version is not true, his whole version. And Gerrinal really tried to push that, and I don't think Masipa understood what he was trying to say. So we went into the fans issue to show that the courts would have been the issues as a measurable issue that they could have gone into, but based on the length of the courts and whatever, he could not have the fans, or there was no place for the small fans to be. So we wanted to show that the essential features, the moving of the fans, darkness, that it would have been pitch dark and all of that, that's not simply not true, and that would not allow his and I think to some degree the sequence of the shot is only for us important to show that she would have screamed, would have been able to scream, because if she was shot in the hip, why would she not scream? I mean, it could not have been a headshot. For me, three things important with regards to the toilet. Only three things. As again, exactly how she fell, exactly how it happened is not that important. I think the three important things: shot in the hip, so she would have been able to scream. Likewise, the first shot was not the head wound. That is just plain logic. If the first shot was the head wound, all the other shots would have missed, because she would have fallen like a sack. She stood upright. The first shot is way up too high to be the too low to be the headshot anyway. But if it was the headshot, she would have fallen.
Yeah.
What that tells me is that there were some shots before the headshot and the that is very important. So the only thing for us there is she would have been able to scream in the toilet, and then the third point is that she did not sustain the back wound in the toilet. If she didn't fall against the rack, that's the only thing that's really important for us in the toilet. What happened after that is not really important to us. We can't. Then we're gonna start speculating exactly what he did.
Well, again, you're basically you have the same approach that Nell did, but in a purely scientific way.
Yeah, and I think we just, with all respect, I don't think he's supposed to be able to do everything. That is why he's got experts, and he's got the whole police force, he's got his whole state machinery to help him. But I don't think they did it adequately. But what we're trying to do is to bring a measurable approach in. So instead of just saying that the score is too short, to say, listen, it's 1.8.
Yeah.
If you the fans, you needed at least a 3-meter cord. That that kind of thing. So to bring in a measurable approach. Then obviously, I think to point out some things that I think either missed or just didn't go into. The spat down the bed, for example, is interesting. It's on the foot end of the bed. You can't really say exactly how the duvet would have lain on the bed. At least it's something that should have brought up, because if you've got spat on the bed, on the linen, then it means the duvet could not have been on the bed. Again, I say there is a possibility that the duvet could have been moved, but at least argue it in court. So a lot of arguments that we felt that they could have argued, arguments that they could have argued in court that they didn't. But I think in terms of our book, as Calvin said, we basically stopped after the shot, sort of, because what happened after that, I think, is going to be very difficult in terms of our approach, in terms of our stuff and our approach.
So are you guys done with this case? Are you done with all of your investigations, or is there anything else that you have planned?
No, I think in terms of this specific case, I think there are certain areas that we just want to fill up a bit. Maybe there are 1 or 2 areas that we want to maybe just focus a bit more on. Nothing necessarily new. I think I personally would like to take the issue of Gert Parman a bit further. I don't think you can just, if a surgeon makes a mistake, you die. The pathologist makes a mistake, kill it and walk free, Maybe can't be the two, but you can't let the one make a mistake and not the other one. So Gerson be held responsible for his whatever he did not do. But I think I don't know how Calvin feels. I think sometimes you feel a bit fed up for the case. I think especially because of all the emotions in the public. We've been attacked severely. I don't mind about that. But I think there is, especially in South Africa, there's now the whole debate. What if it was your daughter? Then they say, what if it was your son? So I'm quite a bit fed up with. Or let me put it this way: I'm standing a bit away from the debates and all that. So maybe we will look at a follow-up book, but more a narrative-driven book. We maybe could collaborate to some degree on that, but more story-like book, not visual format that it does it. And I would like to. I would like to speak to maybe the Hilton daughters. It was difficult in this particular case to speak to people, not because we didn't want to, because of the sub-judice sort of nature of it, and because it was so contentious. A lot of people were simply not willing to talk. I know the script don't want to talk. A lot of people just don't want to talk.
We had the same experience.
It was really difficult. I spoke to Peter Baba personally. He was also we got valuable information from him, but it's very difficult. But what I just wanted to say is I would like to go into the whole story what happened, the cell phones, the cell phone issue. And that is one area we didn't go into, but we thought to our scope for now. It wasn't. You couldn't. I always tell people, we took out tens of pages, where we felt we didn't have either good enough information or material, or where we felt that Calvin is a very good safety net in that. It's not they can say this or whatever. That this could be a counter argument. So we really try to keep it to the strongest part. So some issues went sort of onto let's call it a back burner where we felt, go back later if the information. Subsequently, obviously, a lot of people email us with theories. Get some crazy people, crazy things also, but sometimes you get some good insight, which one maybe can follow up as well. I think the immediate moment, we're just trying to get the book out as far and wide as we can. What I, in South African, obviously, Colin will be more as well, but what I would like to do is not to something that Nick said is I would like to make short video clips of some of the aspects. Then maybe YouTube kind of video clips.
Hey, maybe our Pistorius can give us the phone number for their animator. We can have our Sunday night program.
From my side, I'm just going to keep exposing the bullshit that went on in court. You've probably read some of our posts on our website, our open letter to Barry Rule. There will be more of that type of thing where I painstakingly go through the court record and find out and identify those places where the judge erred or made a mistake, or where Barry tried to deceive, and where experts contradicted themselves and obviously presented false information. I want to pick those things up because I think that the justice system in South Africa gives defense lawyers way too much leeway. The road is too long. And the judges are too scared to rein them in for fearing to create the perception that they're assisting the state and the prosecution. And the stuff that we've seen in this case and what we've seen in the Inga Lotz case of what the defense lawyers were allowed to get away with, that's a big problem in the justice system. On that
level. I think that is what we are trying, where we and I say very humbly, but I think that's where we have success in South Africa at this stage. We get good feedback from overseas as well, but where we would like to try and position ourselves is, to fight. I always say nothing is going to bring Riva back, but we maybe, by doing what we do, we can expose some of the flaws in the system. And I think that is sort of what Calvin and I say is enough for us to keep exposing, using a case like this, a high-profile case like this, to expose some of the flaws. And we've got a big problem with, in particular with defense experts, as Calvin explained. Just go to court, and they tell the court whatever the client wants the court to hear, and then. Also alarming is that, even if the court starts, nothing happens. If you look at Dixon, he testified way out of his field expertise and also out of his league. But what happens? Nobody bats an eye, and it goes on, And we get that time after time after time. So that is where we position ourselves as well, by using a case like this, so it's not an obsession. It's not an obsession with this case in particular, but it's by using a case like this because that is the type of case that gets into the media and all of that. So we will use that to expose defense experts, and not only defense experts, basically any expert that doesn't serve the court, because it happens time after time that murderers get away, and then it's too late. Because that's the reality now of this case. It's too late. Whatever we do now, yes, we can inform the public and we can educate the public and whatever, but Oscar is never gonna get the property.
Hey.